Hi everyone. In today's yeah, I know, I know, I know. Sorry for being gone for so long, guys, but I got very busy all at once in the fall and spring with trying to get my business started and doing work on my house and yard before winter hit because I live in the far north and I didn't want to wait to do any of it until the snow was already on the ground. Then around March, I got so sick I couldn't speak for a month. That all on top of two big phases of burnout. I finally got this video done, but knock on wood, I should be much more free now to get back to the old grind and putting out more videos for you all as we continue through the rest of the year. Hopefully now, I can have something other than collabs being my only new content. But with that, let's get right to the theory. I can well imagine with a title like ShatterWilliam, I have raised a few eyebrows in the theorist community. I can hear the doubts now. Pulling bits of ideas from multiple sources to hammer together a theory for the sake of another upload? That's what I was worried about myself as I was doing the initial research for this theory. I have prided myself on this channel with only putting out theories that I believe in. That's not to demean anyone who doesn't, as they theorize for all sorts of reasons, with fun being a pretty good primary reason among them. The fun for me, though, is adding something to the FNAF theorist community that I think merits conversation in this universe that we all love. Granted, this is also what takes me so long in making theories, too, but I enjoy the extra challenge. So what do I mean by ShatterWilliam? Well, to start, I should probably define what shattering is before going into how I believe it applies to William. The concept of shattering was first theorized by @CubanFancy in their theory about shatter victim. To give a very brief description, shatter victim is the theory that the crying child's soul is shattered when he dies and is split between the core four animatronics of Freddy, Foxy, Chica, and Bonnie, as well as Golden Freddy. Now, the theory goes into much more detail, and I highly encourage you all to check out the original theory, but for today's theory, I want to focus on the concept of shattering itself. For now, though, all you need to know is that shattering is when a soul is shattered into pieces after death and spreads into the world and objects around it. Now, put a pin in that because we'll come back to this later. So how does this apply to William? There's really no good way for me to build any further suspense, so I'll do the big reveal now. Not only do I think Shatter Victim, or some variation of the core idea, is actually happening, I think William learned about this and eventually shattered himself to ensure that he would stay immortal forever. Does that work for a hook? Let's start from the beginning by going over a recap of how I think events happened in the FNAF timeline leading up to the shattering and when I think it happened. So, yes, this is a thin coating of theory hiding the large, gooey center of my insane attempt at a timeline. Without any further ado, sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. William Afton and Henry Emily are running their respective restaurants of Fredbear's Family Diner and Chica's Party World when they first meet each other via contact with a shared contractor named Edwin Murray. Whether or not one or both of them got their starts at Murray Co. is outside of the scope of this video. If you would like, I do go into a little bit more speculation about William and Henry's early relationship in my Chica's Party World theory. But after getting to know each other, and likely working together for some time before, They end up merging their two companies to create Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated sometime after 1973 to 1975, but before 1979. After the events of Secret of the Mimic, William and Henry are going through the MCM facility that they had recently acquired to see what is still salvageable, possibly after a fire, when William, and possibly Henry, discover evidence of either the haunting of David's soul in the building or Edwin's experiments with the Mimic that brought back Fiona's soul and attempted to do so with David via M1 and M2 respectively. This was the first encounter with the supernatural that would point William, and possibly Henry, eventually, towards what would happen later with the remnant experiments and knowledge of the supernatural in general. By 1983, William and Henry open Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and both are on top of the world and at the zenith of their success, before tragedy strikes with the bite of 83 and the death of the crying child. In William's grief and anguish, he largely blames Henry for the death of the crying child, as he had been the one to adapt the old MCM Springlock suits for the characters at both of their restaurants. And after a night of trying to drink his sadness and anger away at Junior's bar, decides to drive back to Freddy's, after another day of working with him while bottling up his frustrations, where Henry is still working into the night to confront him. But as he pulls up to Freddy's, he sees Henry's daughter Charlie being bullied by other kids inside by being locked out. Instead of dealing with what he likely viewed as another Henry problem to deal with himself, in a spur-of-the-moment decision, he decided to murder her and dump her body beside the side dumpster before driving home. As William drives away, the security puppet crawls its way to Charlie before lying next to her body as the rain causes it to malfunction and shut down. After this, we see the events of Midnight Motorist play out as shown in the minigame. With now both William and Henry grieving their losses, they bury themselves in work to cope. While this is happening, William, and possibly Henry, begins to notice the security puppet acting strange and sporting new tear marks on its mask. It had been found next to the body of Charlie, and since William had no memory of seeing the security puppet outside that night, reasoned that it had made its way to her in the rain after he left. William then remembers what he saw all those years ago at MCM, and concludes something supernatural is going on, and, putting two and two together, realizes that Charlie has ended up possessing the security puppet, and, likely not long after that, is also able to make the assumption that the crying child is likely still in Golden Freddy, as it has also likely begun to show paranormal behavior at this point. It's this realization that gets William to begin his remnant experiments and gives him hope that he can possibly revive the crying child. This is when William creates his sister location bunker complex out of the remains of the tunnel system Edwin Murray had built between his former home and factory. Either during or after this point, William also puts Michael through the events of FNAF 4 in his early fear experiments as he tried to understand how possession works, as the only notable similarity to both Charlie and the crying child's deaths to him is that they both were overwhelmed with fear at the time of their deaths. Michael was the perfect test subject for these early fear experiments, as, 1, Michael likely would have done anything for his father, even for years to come, to try and get some sort of forgiveness or atonement from William for his part in killing his brother, and 2, William likely blamed Henry, Michael, and his friends to varying degrees after the crying child's death, and figured if any of them had to suffer over this, Michael was the best choice between them all. Once William has a better understanding of how fear can alter someone's perception before death, and how fear is the common and necessary component of the deaths of both the crying child and Charlie that led to their souls possessing Golden Freddy and the security puppet. He now needed to attach more souls to these machines to continue his experiments. This is because he didn't want to tamper with the crying child or Charlie or what they had attached themselves to. For the crying child, he was who he was doing all of this for in an effort to bring him back, so experimenting with him would be far too risky. And for Charlie, something in the back of his mind, still bitter at Henry for bearing a lot of the blame for causing all of this to begin with, led William to assume that it would hurt Henry even more in the long run if he kept Charlie right where she was in that security puppet, eventually unlocked the secrets of life and death with Remnant, and then never gave it to Henry, doomed to have his child stay dead, forever stuck in that puppet. Maybe, if he begged him long enough, he would eventually bring her back. Or not. In his now increasingly bitter and anger-fueled mind, he couldn't wait to get to that point. But for now, he needed to focus on getting a new source of souls without using either of them. Then, once again, William got another awful idea on how to do just that. Donning the spring Bonnie suit based off of his original Bonnie character, he lured a child into the staff-only room at Freddy's on a night Henry wasn't working there. He had overheard her earlier in the night being comforted by her parents over her dog that had just been run over earlier that day. They must have taken her to Freddy's in an effort to cheer her up. She would be the perfect one to start with. He waited until she wandered off into the arcade away from her parents to approach. She was playing Fruity Maze when he knelt beside her and told her that her dog wasn't really dead, and gesturing to the staff-only room, he said her dog was over there. With a final, "Follow me," he led her and 4 others into the staff-only room and killed them one by one. William now had to put his theory to practice, and placed each of their bodies inside of the animatronics. The first girl for Chica, and the rest from there he then put in Foxy, Freddy, and Bonnie. But now he had a problem. The 5th boy had no other character to go in, he thought to himself, as he was already leading him to the staff-only room. But at that same time, he couldn't have passed up the perfect opportunity for one more to use for his experiments. He hadn't planned on taking a 5th, but his parents had been completely distracted, and he wanted to make sure he had plenty of chances to get it right with his experiments. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, he decided to place his body in the only other suit he knew was in the staff-only room, the Fredbear Springlock suit that had killed his son. While he wasn't totally sure, at this point, if his son was possessing Golden Freddy, the old Fredbear's location, both, or neither, at least with the Golden Freddy suit, there was a chance there would be no complications from directly putting a new child in the suit, and he decided to roll the dice. His son had only been in contact with Fredbear just long enough for that fateful bite after all. There was every possibility that his soul hadn't attached itself completely to the Fredbear suit, as his possession of it seemed to be far less solid than Charlie's was with the security puppet. He had almost forgotten that in the wake of his son's death, Fredbear's had gone out of business not long after, as the public had deemed the restaurant unsafe. He had a hazy memory in that moment of moving both of the Fredbear's Springlock suits to the staff-only room of Freddy's as a temporary storage place, and it was fortunate for him now that he did. The Spring Bonnie suit for him, and now, William then knew what he had to do as he opened the door to the staff-only room. He could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He had learned to move very carefully in the Springlock suits over the years, as they were susceptible to snapping shut at just the wrong hit in the wrong place, and especially at the presence of water or other liquids on the spring locks inside. If someone was inside one of the suits when they snapped shut, they were liable to get seriously injured or even killed. William remembered hearing from the manager he had put at this Freddy's that he had barely survived a spring lock failure back at the old MCM facility himself. Ralph was his name, if he remembered right. If a grown man barely survived a spring lock failure, it might mean an instant death for a child. Or perhaps not. Either way, he was curious if being inside the suit from the moment of death and the suit itself killing him would have any effect on the possession, as he already knew distance and contact was a possible difference in the possessions of his son and Charlie. One more example of why he knew that making that deal with Ralph was the right call. He had originally offered him the manager position in exchange for the employee contact list of MCM as it was falling apart for years before, and seeing all that talent that would shortly be in need of work, it was a no-brainer move for him and Henry to make. What they didn't expect at the time was for Ralph to go above and beyond and tell them about that secret mimic prototype which pushed them to take over MCM completely in the first place, after Edwin refused to sell it, of course. And still, even now, Ralph helped give him another idea, albeit inadvertently, at the 11th hour. As he closed the door behind them, the boy asked where the party was. Freddy and the band had just started a loud musical number as he put him into Fredbear. His cries were drowned out by the song as he triggered the spring locks, and at first the suit limply rustled before he went quiet and still, a few agonizing minutes later, just as the song finished. His plan had worked far better than even he expected. Nobody found any of the children in the days following that night. Even the police searched the building high and low for them and came up largely empty-handed. The few cameras they had only showed the front entrance, main showroom, and arcade. William had the slightest bit of nervousness, as the police came back the next day and told both him and Henry about someone in a suit leading the missing children to the staff-only room. William had been careful enough to know that they had only had enough tape to record during business hours, so there were no recordings of what happened and who came out after the last kid went into the staff-only room, as William had timed his killings just prior to closing. It had been a few days since that night at this point, and William had made sure to clean that entire room from top to bottom that same night. Even the animatronics he had given a once-over, just to make absolutely sure there wasn't a speck of blood to be seen from the outside. By the time the police did their initial walkthrough of Freddy's, there wasn't a hint of foul play to be seen. It had almost immediately paid off. When the police had eventually come back the second time, they shared with them both a theory about a predator from another state, possibly breaking into Freddy's that night, who had recently fled to Utah after assaulting his parole officer. William had to focus on keeping his face neutral, as inside, he was relieved at finding out they weren't even looking in his general direction anymore. During all of this, though, William had noticed Henry was unusually quiet. In the weeks that followed, he became more and more cold and distant to William. They were barely speaking anymore. Not that they had been too friendly with each other since '83. From the outside, this could have been viewed as nothing out of the ordinary given the circumstances, and the fact that Freddy's was seeing fewer and fewer guests every day now, but William knew the signs of the gears turning in Henry's head. He had to assume that if Henry didn't know at this point, he bare minimum had suspicions about him now, and while he was barely speaking with him anymore, he was making absolutely sure to stay no more than 10 feet from William any time he went within eyesight of Freddy's. It eventually got so blatant that Henry was spending 12 hours a day at Freddy's and not leaving until a new night guard he had hired traded off with him. He had been told nothing was to be taken off the property by anyone without Henry's approval. When William was told that by the night guard one night, he knew for sure Henry knew. But the saving grace for him was that he likely couldn't prove anything at this point. But if he or this new night guard caught him trying to take the animatronics from the building, he would be caught red-handed. Just as he thought he could get away scot-free and go right to experimenting, Henry had him cornered. It was only a matter of time before the bodies of the children would begin to rot enough to very obviously smell, so William had to think quick. At the moment, Henry was focused on the whole building and everything in it, not the animatronics themselves, but that would change fast. After a night of agonizing thought, William pulled one last Hail Mary, and the next day went directly to the head of the corporate board of Fazbear Incorporated to convince him to shut down Freddy's in the wake of the tragedy. It wasn't hard to convince him or the rest of the board. Impending dwindling sales and the negative association with that whole building in the public's eye was enough for a simple majority vote between himself and the board to outvote Henry and force the sale of Freddy's. The corporate board of Fazbear Incorporated was your typical hodgepodge of investors who didn't really care about the business, its brand, or customer base. What had caught all of their attention, though, not long after the merger and their new joint company going public, was the meteoric rise in success and the initial sales the first year of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which had exceeded all expectations. They were all on the ground floor of the name in this rising trend of children's food and entertainment venues. So much so that a few other startup companies were popping up around the country, trying to imitate their success around this time. But both Fredbear's and Chica's had been the originals, and with their merger into one company and brand, the growth potential was astronomical. But now, in the wake of this tragedy, they were at risk of all of this success on the horizon falling apart almost instantly. These 5 missing kids at their new restaurant was already bad enough PR, but having to close and sell their original Freddy's location within a year of its grand opening, regardless of how well it did during that year, was an even harder pill to swallow, despite how necessary they all knew it was. As they spent the next few weeks debating about how they could pivot and save the brand, the manager of the closed Freddy's had privately reached out to the corporate head of Fazbear. He had been responsible with the sale or relocation of Fazbear assets before the sale of the building. Much to Henry's later annoyance, he had had to move quickly to empty most of the building over the course of one night to prepare the building for a viewing by a prospective anonymous buyer. It wasn't until weeks later, though, that the sale would fall through anyways, which made the situation all the more frustrating and suspicious for Henry. Before Henry could get a hold of Ralph to ask about where everything had gone in a way that wouldn't arouse suspicion, as Ralph was preparing to move the animatronic suits, he had noticed a terrible smell coming from the back of the safe room. He followed the smell of death to the animatronics that hadn't been moved since the incident a few weeks ago. Worried that a rat had died in a suit, he pulled the casing off of one of the animatronics before he saw, in horror, what he was coming to the corporate head for now. This was bad. Really bad. Brand-killing bad. Before now, they had been able to quell some of the bad PR with points about how the children were only missing and there was no evidence anyone had died at their restaurant. They'd even pointed out to the press how the police had found and arrested that fugitive, and it was only a matter of time before the children were found. But now both he and Ralph knew for sure those kids had died there that night. The proof was right in front of them, as he stood where Ralph had led him to in front of those animatronics at the back of that safe room. The manager was going on and on about how his first instinct was to go to him and asking if they should call the police now. The corporate head's mind swirled with the few options he had at this point. If they called the police now, all of the public's fears would be confirmed, and the reputational damage Fazbear would suffer, on top of what they were already going through from '83, would take years to recover from. In that time, they would probably lose everything, as they would be solely relying on the one Chica's Party World restaurant left as a sole revenue stream after the closure of both Fredbear's and now Freddy's. During this time, the many knockoff companies would immediately jump to fill the void, and Freddy's would never be able to take back the public's favor and rise to the top again. He didn't want to risk going to the board or even the founders for other opinions on what to do now either. He knew about half would share his fears of the company dying and them all losing everything, but he also knew the other half would have a greater fear of getting caught in a cover-up, and it would only take one to quietly go to the police, which would then put him right back in the first scenario. No. Whatever happened from here had to stay with both himself and Ralph. But how did he know for sure he could trust this manager Ralph to keep quiet? He then remembered Ralph was one of the employees here that night. It struck him right then and there what he had to do to save this company and their futures. He turned to Ralph as he shoved him up against a wall and demanded to know how could he do this. Ralph was confused and frantically asked what he was doing. What he was doing? Ralph had just confessed to him about multiple murders. Or at least, that's what he would tell the police if he said anything. Ralph was there that night. Ralph was the one who came to move the bodies, and here Ralph was now, knowing exactly where they were as he showed them to him now, seeking atonement. He said he didn't, and said there's nobody that would believe this insanity. Wasn't there? He was the corporate head of Fazbear. The board would believe him over Ralph. Everything fit. Was Ralph sure the police and eventually a jury would believe him? From the outside looking in, Ralph would look guilty as sin, and Ralph had no way to prove the corporate head would be lying. Taking a moment to appreciate how serious of a situation he was in now, he lowered his head and begged that his daughter would be devastated if he went to prison. Stepping back and breathing for a moment, the corporate head stretched and rolled his head as he thought about what to do now. He noticed a shovel leaned up against the wall of a nearby closet, and once again, the solution was made clear to him. He grabbed the shovel, thrust it into Ralph's trembling hands, and told him if he wanted to make sure none of that happens, he was to make the problem disappear that very night, and what they found that night would stay between them. If he does, he is to never breathe a word of this night again to anyone, including himself. He was to also put a false wall over this safe room before they locked, boarded up, and abandoned this unused Freddy's, and to send a message to all other locations with safe rooms to seal their safe rooms as well. With that, he turned and walked away. He was halfway through the room when he heard Ralph meekly reply, "Yes, Mr. Burroughs." In the wake of all that had happened so far, William had gotten away with murder, but at the same time was right back at square one with starting his experiments. He needed to get a hold of those animatronics one way or another. He had no idea where they had been moved to, and trying to pry an answer out of anyone now would make him look incredibly suspicious. The stench from the animatronics would have been obvious by this point, but for whatever reason, nobody within Fazbear had gone to the police. Either by some miracle, nobody had noticed the smell, or, more than likely, whoever did notice chose not to further hurt the struggling company. Either worked for William, especially the latter, as any further investigations within Fazbear would also end right there at whoever was doing this. This bought him time, at the very least, which was good for him, because the next 2 years after 85 were full of endless board meetings discussing new locations, possible rebrands, character redesigns, new security, and so on and so on. It wasn't until 1987 that the grand reopening of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would finally happen. While Henry had maintained his silence and distance to William during all this time, Henry had made sure to be as annoying as possible to William and his plans. Henry has succeeded in slowly convincing a majority of the board over these past 2 years in installing new security systems in the restaurant. To avoid another incident in the future, Henry would personally link the new facial recognition technology in the new animatronics to public police arrest warrant lists from around the country to set both the board and the public at ease. William knew that Henry had surely slipped in a picture of himself as well, as he was the one handling this new project. He was even adapting that same security puppet that had crawled its way to his daughter's corpse with these new upgrades. All this on top of more cameras inside and out of this new facility. It was going to be much harder for William to get at the animatronics he still needed. William had been waiting patiently these past 2 years for this moment when they would reopen and pull them out of wherever they were being stored, as he knew they would be brought to this new Freddy's to potentially be reused for parts from previous board meetings. But now to get them, he would need to go through much more security than he was hoping for. Every time he stepped within eyesight of Freddy's, Henry would likely know, just like before. So William needed to go undercover to his own restaurant to have any chance of making it inside unnoticed. This was relatively straightforward, as William had been spending these past 2 years learning about prosthetics and his efforts of preemptively building a new body for his son, so making himself a realistic silicone face mask disguise was fairly simple. He had come to the logical conclusion that if his son's body had long decayed, his soul would need to be called into somewhere. He got this idea from what he saw from Edwin's experiments years before, and it would indirectly pay dividends now. Donning his new disguise, he applied for the security position at Freddy's just before its grand reopening. With Ralph now demoted to head of security, it was his sole responsibility to handle the new hires, and once again, that was fortunate for William. After his confrontation with Mr. Burroughs, he was becoming a pile of stress and frayed nerves over the years. Coupled with William's excellent disguise, Ralph had no clue that the new security guard he was interviewing was in fact the co-founder of Fazbear Incorporated. During the night shift after the opening day, William had done his rounds around the building and found exactly what he was looking for in parts and service. There they were. All of the animatronics he had been waiting for years to get a hold of were right in front of him. But he would have to wait a little longer to actually take them. For now, he at least knew for sure where they were. Now, he just had to find a way to discreetly get them out of the building. Over the next few nights, he carefully inspected the security system throughout the building. Cutting the camera feeds would be no good, as he discovered an alert would be sent, more than likely right to Henry, immediately. As he went throughout the building these first few days, these new animatronics would wander, as they were programmed to do. But when they noticed him, they would only stare intently at him. This was still after he had tampered with the facial recognition systems in each of the animatronics, strangely enough. His disguise seemed to be working on top of that, but the few times he had spoken aloud to himself around them was still enough for them to hear and become increasingly interested in him, and, eventually, any of the staff at Freddy's. It got to the point that over the first few nights, they would attempt to get inside his security office. He still knew this would be part of their programming, but something gave him the feeling that there was some sort of malice just underneath the surface with them. He then remembered what he had seen his first night. The original animatronics he was looking for had appeared to be taken apart, with pieces and parts missing. It wasn't until he was left a message from Ralph mentioning they were already repurposing parts from them that he had the suspicion that the souls had attached themselves, at least in part, to these new animatronics as well. Worried that Fazbear's tampering with the animatronics and using parts of them for these new toy animatronics might affect the souls of the children he now needed to find a way to quickly shut the restaurant down, and fast, before the tampering got any worse. This time, William had no need, or time for that matter, to concoct an elaborate ploy to stealthily take away the original animatronics from the building. This time, he needed to do something much more blunt and just as drastic to get the whole building and this new Freddy's restaurant closed immediately. On top of all of this, by the fourth night, Henry had seemingly noticed the tampering he was doing to the animatronics by returning the reused parts to the originals and the security system, and had started an internal investigation at Freddy's trying to find him. There was talk about shutting down the pizzeria, and William knew he was quickly running out of time to take the withered original animatronics out of the building. For him, what came next was obvious. The same thing that worked last time. Only this time, he had no need, interest, or frankly ability in harvesting their souls. He just needed a new group of bodies to shock the Fazbear board into shutting this restaurant down again. Henry, in his desperation, had put the entire building on lockdown the night before. Thankfully, by pure luck, William had just so happened to be working the day it was announced, and, in an effort to buy himself more time, left a resignation letter for Ralph at the end of his shift before hiding in the safe room. This would keep Henry, and eventually the police, chasing shadows for that much longer after what came next. So once again, on the sixth day, donning his spring Bonnie costume in the safe room, he lured 5 children into the safe room of Freddy's and killed them one by one. This time, however, he made no effort to hide the bodies. In fact, he posed their bodies around the entire building, completely in the open. What better way to get this done as quickly as possible than not only leaving their bodies in the open, but staging them throughout the building in a way that was obvious for anyone to see? Once again, it worked better than William had expected. By the shift change that night, the entire building was crawling with police. Henry, of course, was at the scene talking with both them and Ralph, trying to understand what had happened. It turned out as well that the manager Ralph had tried to call him that very day for some reason or another. William, looking back years later, couldn't remember if it was questions about the animatronics or not. Not that it mattered. He just needed to make sure that his excuse for not answering the phone during what happened at Freddy's was accounted for. At this point, he had spent 2 years almost completely estranged from Henry and the board of Fazbear, with little to no contact or oversight from either, outside of their board meetings, so his excuse of being tied up in a personal project when the call came in fit perfectly to everyone. Everyone except Henry. Once again, William had slipped through the cracks right under Henry's nose, and he knew that once again, he had no way to prove it. Despite all his preparation, William had planned every detail meticulously. Henry and the police were busy trying to track down the day shift security guard who had handed in his resignation just before the murders. But after that, there was no trace of him. It was almost like he didn't even exist. Henry, and eventually the police would come to think weeks later. Thankfully, Ralph, the new head of security at Freddy's, had failed to notice the lack of personal info given by the new security hire, or even that the home address he gave in his application led to an abandoned tire shop 2 towns over. This made it all the more difficult to track this mystery guard down, and by the time they realized it was a fake alias, William was already long gone. He had planned this meticulously for years, and everything was going according to plan thus far. It was now up to Michael to fulfill his part of the plan. William had to be with the board, Henry, and the police from then to the next night, trying to figure out the situation. Any excuse he would give for not being with them now as co-owner of the company would look massively suspicious once he was told the news, and he knew Henry would be sure to point that out to everyone. So while William handled the situation with them and kept all eyes, particularly Henry's, on him, Michael was to slip into Freddy's while disguised as the new night security guard the next night and move the original animatronics back to their home. William had already destroyed the security footage and disposed of it at the time of the murders, so now all Michael had to do was move the animatronics. Michael had been more than willing to help his father with this. Well, William was even still only willing to tell Michael the bare minimum of what was going on. He knew enough to understand the gravity of what he was doing, and, at the same time, how important it was for atoning for his part in killing his brother. As he walked to the security office at the start of his shift, he wondered how he was going to get the animatronics outside by himself to the van. As he sat down at the desk to make absolutely sure the security cameras were indeed still off, just as he was told to do after William had turned them off the previous night, he got an ominous feeling that something was watching him from the darkness. It wasn't long until the various animatronics in the building were repeatedly trying to get in his office. William had warned him that they would do this, but this felt different. Again and again and again they came. It took all of his focus and reaction speed to just survive, as he knew a grisly fate awaited him if they caught him not wearing the Freddy mask. What had gone from just a quick stop to make sure he wasn't being recorded quickly turned into an entire night of fighting for his life. It felt like an eternity later, but eventually the alarm sounded at 6 a.m., signaling the shift change, and as if a switch was flipped, all of the animatronics stopped their relentless assault and went back to normal. Michael didn't even stop to chat with the other day shift guard. The second he saw his replacement walk into the office, he bolted for the door and straight to his van in sheer panic. It didn't even occur to Michael in that moment that he would have to tell his father that he returned empty-handed from his shift. Even more tragic was that Michael would likely have been free to take the animatronics they needed after he survived the night, had he thought to do so. How much the surface-level cold disappointment just above the scalding hot anger from William that night as he told him this shook him to his core. William was sure to point out to Michael that everything they had done now was all for nothing because of him. Sure, they had succeeded in causing the inevitable shutdown of Freddy's, just like William had done before, but now, once again, whoever within Fazbear that had found them the first time would quickly move the possessed animatronics somewhere else, and William would once again have no idea where, and no way to find out without revealing himself to whoever within Fazbear was keeping a lid on the whole situation. While it would be far worse to get caught by Henry or the police, having that amount of blackmail against him by a clearly unscrupulous board member would be just behind it in scale. William would, for years to come, be sure to remind Michael of this and how he had put them that much further behind in saving his brother. Michael himself now also felt even more indebted to William, as he had probably set William back years in getting to begin his experiments. But they had both gone too far now to turn back. So once again, William reset and adjusted. It is at this point, after 1987, but before 1993, William begins to build the fun times to eventually operate in Circus Baby's Pizza World, a new restaurant tied to his company, Afton Robotics LLC, and away from the prying eyes of Henry, to capture children discreetly for his experiments. He had already wasted enough time trying to get those first 5. Surely, it would be much easier to make more in a more controlled manner. He warns his daughter Elizabeth against going anywhere near Circus Baby, as she is fascinated by her in particular. But during the opening day of the restaurant, Elizabeth snuck away from William in the opening day commotion to go see Circus Baby. But after speaking with Circus Baby as she approached her, Circus Baby's stomach opened and grabbed Elizabeth. Fear overwhelmed her in that moment, as she was near instantly pulled into her, and also near instantly killed from the sheer force of the grab. Once again, one of William's children was killed by these animatronics, but this time, he had nobody else to blame but himself for her death. Any semblance of the goodness in the man that came before was snuffed out in the bitterness, resentment, and anger that overwhelmed him now. Something snapped in him when he opened Circus Baby that night, after seeing she had caught something on her first day. Once again, he was consumed by all that he felt before, but worse. Anger, resentment, grief, despair, and fury. She was always his favorite. He had always felt closer with her than his sons. She had just always seemed to be on the same wavelength as him, unlike his sons. And now she was gone, all because of him. All from this vain effort to bring his son back. He couldn't stop now. Not after this. All of this would have been for nothing if he stopped now. And if he kept going, there was a chance he could bring them both back. He just needed to reset and adjust. And he did. And once again, he got another awful idea on how to do just that. After the closure of Circus Baby's Pizza World on its opening day due to a supposed gas leak, William turned his attention to his bunker complex and decided to retrofit it to be a host to a new rental service for the Funtime animatronics he had made for the restaurant. Starting the new Circus Baby's entertainment and rental was fairly easy, with most of the work already done. But due to the near-instant closure and relocation or sale at a loss of all of the assets of Circus Baby's Pizza World that he had largely bought himself, William could no longer rely solely on his own money to kickstart this new venture of a mobile animatronic rental service. This time, he would need to tap into the resources of Fazbear Entertainment itself. Unfortunately for him, that meant involving not just Henry, but the corporate board as well. But fortunately for William, both he and Henry had been particular about who they sold the initial shares of Fazbear Incorporated to. They were a mishmash of mainly investors who couldn't care less about the brand and only its success, but also a few fellow creatives or even supporters and former employees of their previous ventures from Fredbear's and Chica's Party World. The chairman of the board in particular was a curious and intelligent but fundamentally unscrupulous individual. He took a bit more to convince than the others, but with him speaking for the rest of the board, once he knew that the design quirks were benign experimental functions of these new animatronics, the rest of the board soon agreed, despite Henry's doubts. And now William had all the funding he needed to get this new business started in an effort to bring into the company much needed funds. But money wasn't the focus of this new venture for William. The entire purpose of the rental service was to kidnap children, with the kidnappings happening over varying gaps in time and multiple locations across the country as discreetly as possible to avoid as much suspicion as possible. The public and the police would either assume runaways, bad divorce fights, or even the occasional random kidnapping, and have no suspicion of an organized kidnapping operation. This worked for William perfectly, and he had a new continual stream of souls coming in, now with far less risk than before, now that he was being watched much more closely by Henry after the missing children incident from '85. This was the ideal situation William had finally found himself in for the next 6 years. Using lessons learned previously, he carefully planned each kidnapping via the fun times and perfected and tweaked their parameters for when they would decide to kidnap a child. Most parties and rentals he would outright refuse an attempt. This from either too small of a crowd, which would make a disappearance that much more quickly and obviously noticed, but even more subtle things like how attentive the parents were, the location, what type of party it was, and even the time of year. While this was already far, far, far safer than what he had previously done personally, he still knew that his animatronics would only need to be caught once for it to all come crashing down and the police to be led right to him. Being so careful and meticulously planning each kidnapping to such a degree meant his new method of gathering souls was leagues and bounds more safe, but much slower than it could be. Even still, he was gathering souls to experiment with leagues and bounds faster than before. He had spent years wasting time trying to take the souls from his original victims when he could have done this years before, and he would come to regret that later. He never even ended up with his first victims anyways, so his previous efforts were a net zero. That fact alone also tumbled around in his increasingly deranged mind over these years. The ones that got away, his first successful trials that he could never claim. Still, for the time being, he pushed those thoughts to the side and focused finally during this time on what he had waited for years to do: beginning his experiments. William's first experiments were first about the physical animatronics themselves. By this point, it was pretty clear to him how a soul becomes attached to a physical object. But what he had seen at the reopened Freddy's made him wonder what happened to a soul when its vessel was taken apart. After all, he had been pushed to kill those children so quickly specifically because Fazbear had begun to use parts from the originals in the toy animatronics. He was worried at the time that doing so might affect the possession of each animatronic, and with what he personally saw with them that week by himself and Michael, there seemed to be evidence to support this idea. Clearly, then, a soul could be pulled apart or stretched if what they were inhabiting was also pulled apart or stretched. After an initial run of semi-successful experiments where he would take pieces off of the possessed fun times and put them onto other test animatronics, he was able to confirm what he already suspected. A soul could inhabit 2 or more bodies or vessels in a stretched or weakened form. But he wanted to take this idea even further. He was excited by this revelation, as it meant he would very likely be able to move his son and Elizabeth into new bodies. He now needed to know how far you could take this pulling or stretching. Could you make a stretched connection stronger by melting down pieces of the material and injecting or molding it onto another object? Once again, his suspicions were proven correct. It did appear that it was indeed the case. Now, all that remained was the final question he was desperately hoping was the case. Could you take this one final step further? Could you completely melt down the vessel a soul attached itself to and transfer it and the soul attached to it onto a completely new vessel? It had already been years of careful planning and experimenting by this point. Even now, as he was being contacted by the corporate board of Fazbear requesting his vote on approving the opening of a new Freddy's, he took a moment to reflect on his past 6 years of work. He had also taken plenty of time dedicated to side projects during this time, and they had paid off as well in their own ways. How far could you stretch the connection of a soul? What objects worked better or worse as vessels? Did any particular factors of the soul, like age, affect the possession? And of course, perfecting his tweaking of the old mimic program and of prosthetics so both could be used for a new body for his son that would be indistinguishable from a normal boy. All that was left now was for that final question: could he move his son? Testing this was relatively straightforward. Taking all of the liquid metal from a melted vessel, he would coat a test endo in this liquefied molten vessel metal, which he would later dub Remnant. It worked near instantly. The test endos seemed to radiate the same aura of a soul as its eyes tracked him with what he perceived to almost be fear. It worked. He had done it. He had proven that not only was there life after death, and potentially even a form of immortality if distilled enough for a living creature to use, he had finally proven to himself what he set out to discover years ago: that you can bring someone back from the dead. Now sure, he would need to do many more tests to find the best methodology on transferring a soul, finding out how much of his son was possessing Golden Freddy, and discovering how to coax a soul that had died normally into an unrelated vessel, in case his son's connection to Golden Freddy wasn't that strong. But he had now crossed the biggest hurdle, and he already had an idea on how to tackle the former problem. Edwin, years and years before, had already laid the groundwork for that and done most of the experimenting for him. It was fitting that he reused Edwin's blueprints from his Mimic project. Not just the original endo, but this process for coaxing a soul to a new body and the Mimic program, which was a necessary component to guide the soul to its new body. As it turned out, he and Henry had already adapted the Mimic program Edwin had developed for their own animatronics years and years ago, so it also was relatively straightforward to begin work on a Mimic program that would start mimicking his son. He had also gotten some pointers from the old Mexis computer down in the old MCM R&D area. She, or the program copying her, promised almost as much as it demanded from him. William didn't pay it much mind, but in the off chance that thing really was Fiona, he decided the extra pointers it was giving couldn't hurt. It would certainly take a while, as his son was long dead by this point, so training a program just on pictures, recordings, clothing, environments, and anything else he could think of would be difficult and time-consuming. It was still bearing fruit. After leaving the endo of the future vessel for his son to slowly learn to mimic him on its own, and with the help of this Mexis computer, William took a moment to appreciate how far he had truly come. Some small corner of his mind wondered aloud if all of this had been worth it. Would this vessel truly be his son again? Was all the killing, soul harvesting, and experimenting worth it? Of course it is. His own mind shot back at himself. Once I know for sure he is back, coming up with a way to shove that in Henry's judging face in a way that wouldn't backfire would make all of this worth it. That is why I am doing any of this. Or no. He was doing this to bring his son back, and taunting Henry was the cherry on top. Or was it really, if it was a given, he could get his son back now? No, this was no petty revenge plot. This was to bring back his son, what Henry had taken from him. To show he was the better of the two by bringing his son back and leaving Henry to languish with Charlie still in that puppet, and then throw it all in Henry's face. That he was helpless to stop or prove any of this. Or no. It was both? William himself wasn't even sure anymore. His own mind, so full of anger, bitterness, and anguish, had been tearing at itself for years. These days, these internal debates were becoming rarer and rarer, especially as his experiments continually proved that any of this was even possible. He was a broken shell of his former self, and he lacked the ability, or care, to even notice how far he had truly fallen. The only thing that mattered was putting his son back together again. Now the last thing he needed to do was prepare his son to be moved. He had hung on to the old Fredbear Springlock suit since he had tried to get his original victims in the reopened Freddy's. At the time, he had wondered if it was worth the effort to take both suits with him. They were both bulky and hard to move to his van, but he reminded himself that his son had likely attached his soul in some way to the Fredbear suit. And as for the Spring Bonnie suit, he never knew if he might need it again in the future, so he might as well have taken it too while he had the chance. For now, though, his focus was, and had been for years on, bringing his son and now daughter back. As he went to examine the Golden Freddy suit more closely, he saw flashes of an angry boy forced into his mind. He had nearly forgotten after all these years that he had killed that extra boy and put him in Golden Freddy. He knew he was there, and that his possession would be particularly strong because of how he had killed him, but he had been so focused on trying to bring his son back that he had forgotten he still had one more obstacle to overcome, separating this boy's soul from his son's. After having spent so many years and gone through so much effort to finally get to this point, William was sure to have an overabundance of caution in moving his son. He had already known from earlier experiments that you can take pieces of a possessed vessel off of the main body, put it onto another blank vessel, and then put it back on the original with seemingly no side effects. Knowing this, he would have to remove a piece of the Golden Freddy animatronic to be melted down and moved to a test endo as a baseline. He was only slightly dismayed and not surprised at all when this test endo seemed to contain a piece of both this boy and his son. He knew it wouldn't be that easy. A blank template of a test endo like this wouldn't be enough to call his son's soul specifically. He now decided to try again with another test endo, but this time it was running a copy of the current version of the Mimic program he had been training to learn about his son. Trying again, William once again took a piece of Golden Freddy and attached it to the test endo, now running the Mimic program trained on his son. At first, he was excited to see that it seemed to be working. He can not only sense a small piece of his son in this test endo, he also had a flash vision in his mind of the words, "It's me." Just as he was smiling to himself, he turned back to the test endo and noticed a stark change. It stared at him blankly, as he felt as if it was suddenly full of malice. As he leaned in closer, an image of Golden Freddy's face flashed in his mind and startled him. As he fell back to the floor, he could have sworn he heard the laughter of a little boy. Cursing to himself, he instantly knew what this meant. He had successfully moved a piece of his son's soul to the test endo, but mere moments later, the soul of that boy seemed to somehow follow it, or at least a piece of it did. Strange. Did this mean that his son's connection to the Golden Freddy suit was stronger than he thought? Were their souls still somehow intertwined? Or worse yet, was the soul of the boy following his son's? Could a soul do that? Willingly leave its vessel? He had seen no evidence of this happening in any of his prior experiments, and now regretted not thinking to test this with another Springlock suit in the past. Not that he could have anyways. Fazbear still held all of the machinery capable of making their version of the Springlock suits, and William knew there was no way for him to sneakily make an entirely new Springlock suit on his own without being caught, and any others they might have would have long been under lock and key by this point. The two missing Springlock suits he had taken with him after his group of killings in '85 would have absolutely been noted by Henry at the time, and he would have made sure to keep the rest secure from that point on. During the next few weeks, William would try experiment after experiment after experiment, but nothing he thought of would work, at least not for very long. Every time he tried to move his son's soul, that boy was right behind him. William was getting increasingly frustrated and desperate after each new failed experiment. As time went on, an infuriating thought crept into the back of his mind. What if it wasn't the method of moving that was the problem, but the fact their souls were intertwined in the first place? What if this boy was the sole reason nothing he was trying was working? He seemed to have a lot of malice towards William and had kept showing up in every test, almost as if he was taunting him, that nothing he could do would separate the two. He was clearly doing this on purpose, and somehow had the power to do this too. If it was because of how he had been killed, or just the fact that they shared a vessel, William wasn't sure. But either way, William had to struggle against the dawning realization that no matter what he did, this boy would never let his son's soul go. In a desperate fit of rage, William went to try the only thing he thought of that was left to try: destroying the Golden Freddy suit completely to try and remove both of their souls from their vessel, to then try to call his son's then free soul from the ether, like Edwin did with his wife all those years ago. Or at least that seemed to be what Edwin did. Or at least what Edwin thought he did. It was a long shot, but he was out of options at this point. But once again, just as he was about to dump the animatronic into his smelter, the words, "It's me," once again flashed in his head. But as he turned to look down, he could have sworn he saw the face of a little boy glaring at him from one of the eye sockets. Only a moment passed as he stared at the figure before a flash image of Golden Freddy reaching up to grab him filled his vision, as a robotic screaming also filled his ears. Startled, he fell back to the floor, much like he had months ago at this point when he first started testing the animatronic, and much like before when he looked up, everything was as it should be. Golden Freddy laid motionless on the conveyor, and all was quiet. It was only quiet for a few minutes, though. For those few minutes, that felt like hours at the time, all stayed quiet. Neither William or the animatronic moved. Then, William began to laugh. Not the laugh of a mirthful humor, but a sort of crazed, maniacal laughter, filled with every emotion William was still capable of distinguishing from one another. As he laughed to himself in this workshop within the bowels of Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, tears began to fall from his eyes as he sat laughing in that room. He couldn't tell at the time, or when he thought back to this moment years later, if they had been tears of humor, joy, anger, sadness, all of them or none of them. And frankly, from this moment on, it didn't really matter. William from this moment would take what he knew and use it for himself. He had been a good father. He knew it. He had killed, experimented, evaded police, tortured Michael with fear experiments, neglected his wife to the point of estrangement, lost his beloved daughter, everything. He had given everything to bring his son back. And it was all for nothing. All for nothing. As William's laughter ebbed, he wiped his eyes for the final time and swore to himself from that moment on he would use his knowledge on the one person who deserved it, the one who had suffered the most in all of this: himself. It was the start of the fall before William had finally responded to all the letters he had gotten over the year. A month had gone by since his final experiment, and William was reaching out to the board to finally give his approval for a new restaurant to be opened. Despite both William's and Henry's apparent lack of interest in reopening Freddy's, the corporate board was desperate to try and save the brand. The more scrupulous investors had already long cut their losses and sold off their shares years ago, and both William and Henry tried to grab as much of these shares as they could when they were sold. Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated had effectively been on financial life support from Chica's Party World and Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals since 1987, and the second incident. Those who had remained on this sinking ship of a brand were desperately trying to restart the brand yet again. It had been 6 years since the last Freddy's closed, and now one of the co-owners was finally giving his approval to reopen yet again. They had been so desperate and destitute at that point that not only did they immediately move to re-vote among the remaining shareholders the next day after William gave his approval, they were willing to go so low as to reuse the location of the original abandoned Freddy's location they still owned, where those children had went missing all those years ago. The place had sat empty and unused for all these years. Most of it had been cleared out, but since nobody had been bothering to watch over the building, vandals had broken in at some point and damaged pretty much anything and everything that remained. Booths, the prize counter, candy machine, shelves, windows, and much else besides had all been vandalized at some point in the years since '85. Graffiti littered the walls, the roof was leaking in several places, trash was strewn throughout the building. It would be a miracle if they could even pass a health inspection to reopen in this place. But they had no other choice. Between their two remaining businesses, they had barely enough money to stay afloat for years now. They simply did not have the money to buy another location, even had they wanted to, and even now, they were still trying to skimp out on the restoration of this old dump. Some things never change, William thought to himself as he saw all of this unfold. He had his own motive for finally approving all this, and Henry was sure to be curious. William had figured that now that he was free from his experiments, at least for the foreseeable future, he would be best served now by tying up some loose ends. He knew that not just Henry, but someone high up the chain at Fazbear had potential blackmail on him for all these years. It was highly likely Henry and this third party weren't in cahoots, as whoever it was at Fazbear didn't know which of them it was, but they bare minimum would suspect either of the two original owners. In his cynical mind, he figured this is why he hadn't been approached with said blackmail by this point, and, frankly, it was better for them that he didn't know who they were either. Henry, despite his little choice in the matter at this turn of events, also had his own motives that led him eventually approving the move as well by the time of the board meeting. William had been quietly working in his dungeon all these years far away from his sight. He knew the board had been reaching out to him with no response for quite a while to restart, and Henry had no motivation to see another Freddy's open. He had been patiently waiting for all these years for William to make a move, but he never did. He knew that William had been busy since his rental service had been approved, and it likely wasn't just a way for him to make money for them all. And whatever he was up to, but at the same time, he had no way to prove that, and much like he had done to William before, any time he tried to see the rental service he was running out of that old tunnel system Edwin had built years ago, William was never more than an arm's reach away, and was all smiles and excuses as to why he could never see more than a fraction of the facility. He was powerless to pry into what William was doing down there any more than he already had been scrutinizing in its approval. But the fact was, even at the time, Fazbear was running out of money, and they knew they couldn't rely on his old Chica's Party World restaurant forever. So all this time, he had to patiently wait for William to make the next move, and here he was now, clearly up to something with his response after months of silence to suddenly approving the reopening of Freddy's. Henry approved as well, even if only to keep up appearances. Almost as if he used it as a sign to William he was up for playing this game. In the intervening years, he had become obsessed with going over every little detail that came before. Everything from going over days' worth of old security footage, old purchase receipts, and interviewing old employees. Looking for the tiniest detail he might have missed that would pin William to his crimes. But after all these years he spent hyper-focused on catching William, he had neglected his own family in the process. His wife had left him years ago, and yet while it saddened him, it also made him think about how William was still technically married to his wife as far as he knew, despite not seeing her for years either. He wondered if she even knew about all this. In every aspect of his life, it all came back to William. As much as he hated him now, his life revolved around him in an effort to catch him. Here they were again, after all these years of quiet planning from all of them. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was open once again. But the magic that used to fill the air of their old restaurant was long gone. This place was a dump. Even after all the effort, and much less money, was used to try and renovate this place, it was nowhere near enough. While the air itself still had a faint odor of mold and stale cheese, the stench of death still lingered within these walls. The roof leaked less than before, but all it took was a long enough rain and it would start leaking again. The cheap paint used to repaint the walls, the reused shelves and machines from older restaurants, the decade-old arcade machines like Fruity Maze, prizes of characters that were long since gone. They were each in their own way a small sacrilege to all that had come before. but at the top of this mountain of desperation and pale imitation of what came before, the animatronics themselves stood atop it all as the undisputed masters of disrespected legacy. They had once again been pulled out of storage to be the main band. A token effort had been made to clean the suits again, but to the handful that knew, they themselves would always be the source of this ever-present foulness. This was especially true for Ralph. He had spent years floating around what was left of Fazbear Entertainment since 1987. Mr. Burroughs was sure to shuffle him around from Chica's Party World to Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, to keep an eye on both of the two co-owners. Despite his situation, Ralph had done all he could to see the bright side in all this. Namely, that he wasn't in prison right now. That sword over his head never left the back of his mind, and was why he stuck around Fazbear for all these years. He was essentially a puppet of Mr. Burroughs, and could not risk giving him any reason to second-guess their deal. So, here he was again, this time not even head of security, but a lowly security guard himself now. He missed that brief time he was managing the first ever Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. That seemed like so long ago now, and he supposed to himself that it was now. That time in his life was the only time he felt truly happy. Well, no, that wasn't true. If he was completely honest with himself, he was happiest when he worked at MCM in the early days. When Edwin took over after his father's death, that whole facility was full of life from new ideas and happy employees. But it all started slowly falling apart after Fiona died in that fire. The details of which were fuzzy to him in this moment of recollection, but what he did remember was how MCM slowly fell apart after that. When Edwin lost his son a few years later and started spending all his time talking to that robot, it was like the final nail in the coffin of MCM. "Ralph!" The loud voice of Mr. Burroughs shocked him out of his daydream and back to the dank, dark halls of this former Freddy's. "Oh, yes, Mr. Burroughs. I'm sorry, I was—" Ralph replied meekly before being cut off by Mr. Burroughs. "Ralph, I don't care what you've been doing. I need you focused. These two are up to something. After years of unanswered calls and my letters, they both finally decide to approve the board's vote to reopen a Freddy's within days of each other? Something is going on here, and I still have no idea which of them was the cause of all of our problems years ago. Thanks to you, by the way." "Mr. Burroughs," Ralph began, "I've been over this application and interview in my head for years. If that really was one of them, they must have done a flawless job disguising themselves because—" Yes, save your excuses," Mr. Burroughs interrupted again. "I've heard these exact lines from you for years, and despite that, you still failed to tell me which of those two was responsible for everything, so I can use that against them to finally turn this company around. Fazbear is on its last legs as a company. Our competitors have slowly taken a spotlight over the last decade. We have one last shot at the comeback of the century here, but only if I can finally get the leverage I need on one of them. And, just like before, you need me to catch whoever it is doing something, right?" asked Ralph, finally brave or mentally exhausted enough to almost voice the implication of what he meant. Before Mr. Burroughs could interrupt again, Ralph continued. "Well, what do I do if I catch either one of them doing something, and they decide to attack me? Whoever it is will surely kill me to keep their secret, and then you'd be right back at square one." He hoped the slightest tinge of edge to his voice would be enough for Mr. Burroughs to reconsider his plan. But once again, he had already long thought of that. "I have just the thing." Mr. Burroughs replied coyly as he opened his briefcase on the desk of the security office. Inside, he moved aside some papers and what looked like an old data diver, and he pulled out a small metal rod with a handle and button on the end. "Here," he replied curtly as he held the rod out to Ralph. "In case that happens, that should be more than enough. Once he's down on the ground, keep him there with that and call me. I have a few trusted employees on standby who owe me, and we can all have a nice long chat together," he said as he ended his sentence with the slightest hint of a grin. Curious, Ralph pressed the button on the handle of the rod, and instantly a loud, continuous spark of electricity arced between the two prongs at the end of the rod, and, in doing so, his next question was already answered. "Heh. Knowing you, I was half expecting a gun," said Ralph bluntly. Mr. Burroughs' face quickly turned to a frown. "He's no good to me dead. But I guess that's something you both have in common now, isn't it?" he jabbed back, slightly surprised at Ralph's subtle insult. "This is the last chance for both of us. I've already invested too much time, money, and effort into this company. Either you do this and help me turn this company around, or I'll be sure you go down under with it." As he turned to walk out the door, he paused, turned his head, and in a low voice said, "There's no statute of limitation on murder, you know. Think about that while you record more of those tapes for the new guy," before continuing out of the office. The first few weeks of business at the reopened Freddy's was slow. It seemed like the public hadn't forgotten all that happened before, and those few who did come were just as appalled at the fall from grace as the employees, and almost never came back a second time. The quality of everything at the pizzeria had taken a nosedive since '87, and it was apparent for all to see. Even Mr. Burroughs didn't have any real hope of revitalizing the brand in this way. It's as if it was a 3- or 4-way Cold War between these men, depending on how one looked at the situation, all waiting for the others to make a move or slip up. Each with their own plans and schemes, with Ralph caught in the middle of all of this. For William's part, though, once again this was all going according to plan. He had Michael once again take a security job, and this time, he had only had one job so simple that even he couldn't screw it up. He would maintain his job and stay undercover until William was ready to make his move again. William figured he would wait a few weeks after opening just to be sure before making his move. He had hoped that this slight delay might have caught Henry off guard, and exhausted by that point of weeks of surely sleepless nights. Just as in years before, his goal was to take the original animatronics that were also brought out of their hidden storage, and once he confirmed it was indeed them, he would also once again need to close down the restaurant. Everything was in place for him to not only take the souls of his first spree of killings, but he could possibly add a few more at this reopened pizzeria one last time before it surely closed for good after that. Not that William cared. He had long made sure in the years before that whatever happened next, Afton Robotics LLC would stay his if Fazbear went bankrupt. Which was the other half of the entire plan. Take the possessed animatronics and dissolve Fazbear Entertainment for good. That way, once the company was broken up, Henry would have no say or pull on any of William's business or plans ever again. The rental service had done financially well enough to support itself and keep Fazbear on life support at the same time for years. But once William was free from Fazbear, he would be excited to see just how quickly he could expand the service. Everything was in place for this to happen. William had even had Michael sneak in his suit to the safe room for this first week working undercover. Just as the time was drawing near for William to once again take a new group of victims, something unexpected happened. One of the employees was killed by one of the old animatronics in an apparent accident. During his shift, he was apparently mistaken for an endoskeleton by the animatronics and stuffed inside of a suit in the back that had already had an endoskeleton inside, and he was killed near instantly. William, and Henry for that matter, knew that they had not programmed the endoskeletons in the mascot suits to do such mundane yet complex tasks. But since he had already said exactly that to the security guard Ralph to quiet his worries about the animatronics, it seemed to work as a preemptive excuse to the authorities for him as well after his death. But by that point, he was busy dealing with closing the last chapter of this tragic story once and for all. Once the news reached the public the next day after the death was reported, both William and Henry knew that it was only a matter of time now before once again the business went under. William knew he had to act quickly before Henry or anyone else in the company hid these animatronics away from him once again. Not giving Henry the chance to do that, William over the next few days would sneak into the pizzeria after it had been temporarily closed, to one by one sneak out from the safe room and disable, then dismantle each animatronic that wandered by the safe room. He knew there was a level of risk, as now the animatronics had been repaired enough to walk freely throughout the building at night. With the souls of the children still in them, William knew that there was every chance they could still overpower him if he wasn't careful. Jumping out from the safe room with a cattle prod-style taser, that seemed to be the safest option for him, but just in case something went wrong, William also had a backup plan. He left a letter for Michael that if anything were to happen to him during this final step, and he didn't hear from him after so long, he was to do something very important. But for now, William was focused on the task at hand, so one by one, he snuck out from the safe room as they wandered by and disabled them before disassembling them. The extra souls to experiment on were more of a side bonus, as he already had long had a slow but steady stream of it from his rental service. This was much more about tying up loose ends and, though he wouldn't admit it to himself, healing a wounded pride of having his first successes denied to him for so long. Night after night, William would sneak into the abandoned Freddy's and one by one disable and then dismantle each of the characters. He loaded each of the dismantled endos into his van to be taken back to Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals for him to experiment with later. For now, though, he left the disassembled endos at Circus Baby's until he had caught them all. He knew exactly what he wanted to do with each of them. He had waited until now to try this in an experiment, as he was bitterly wanting to use his first victims to be his first test subjects in one of his last major experiments. After he had gathered all of the endoskeletons, he did his usual process of harvesting remnant by melting each of the endos into a liquid form. But what he did next would answer a question he had been curious about for years. He then mixed each of the batches of molten remnant into a single pool. Taking this batch of mixed remnant, he cast the mixture onto previously existing endoskeletons and observed the effects. It was just as he suspected. Even spread between multiple vessels, each one contained an even portion of one of the original 4 souls. He would want to wait to see the effects of having more souls spread over more bodies, even if only out of morbid curiosity at this point. Now that he had all that he needed to do so, he took a moment to appreciate how far he had come in all of this, as he looked over the inactive vessel of his own son. Henry would soon be unable to interfere with his plans ever again, and now he had tied up a loose end that could have been used against him, while simultaneously using them for his last experiment that would be used to save his son. Or possibly, at least. He had even been sure to involve Michael in a backup plan that, at this point, no longer seemed necessary. Yet, something still felt missing. It was almost as if after spending so many years on a knife's edge, he didn't know how to process the feeling of relaxation. Just as he began to let his high-strung mind finally relax, a sudden realization came to him. The spring Bonnie suit! He had forgotten that it was still at the abandoned Freddy's. That would become a loose end if he just left it there, as he was sure at least a few would know that it was not there when the building was abandoned years ago, should any of them find it there. In his brief moment of triumph, he had forgotten that that part of the plan was entirely unnecessary anymore. But if he wanted to avoid leaving another liability behind, he would need to return to the abandoned Freddy's and take back his old spring Bonnie suit. It also felt like leaving a piece of himself behind to be forgotten. He had accomplished so much of this up to this point because of that old springlock suit. He felt like hanging on to it for memory's sake was the least he could do to respect their shared legacy together. Before he left, he felt it was a good idea, just in case, to go over the backup plan with Michael one last time before he went back to Freddy's for probably the last time. He never trusted Michael since his failure at the reopened Freddy's in '87. Not completely, anyways. He wanted to make sure that he laid out his backup plan so clearly that even Michael wouldn't mess it up. After he was sure that Michael had his notes he had made for him and that he knew the backup plan inside and out, William made his way to the abandoned Freddy's. It was a quiet drive by himself to collect the spring Bonnie suit. He was so close to finally allowing himself to enjoy his victory. Tying up this one last loose end, and he would be free to experiment to his heart's content for years to come. And with how he had perfected his abduction methods with the fun times through the rental service, he would have a steady stream of remnant for the foreseeable future. With all of this reminiscing, he idly wondered to himself if he would reach out to his wife if he did end up succeeding in bringing their son back. Michael would already know more or less about the vague outline of the process at least. But Trisha? She had been estranged from him for years at this point. He couldn't quite remember exactly when, as he drove down a quiet, rainy country road to Freddy's. He had a vague notion it was somewhere between his operation at the reopened Freddy's and now. It's not like anything was official, or even anything so much as a conversation was ever had over her increasing absence from their home. As far as he knew, they were even still married. Not that it meant much at this point. But if it did end up working like he thought it would, and he was actually able to bring back their son, maybe he could convince her to come back and live with him and Michael again. He gripped the steering wheel a little harder at that thought. He was nowhere near ready to process any of these emotions. Not yet, at least. But for now, he needed his mind on the task at hand, getting this suit back. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary as William parked his van in front of the old abandoned Freddy's, but a sense of unease started to dawn on him as he stepped out of the van. He was almost expecting something? He wasn't sure, but William couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched or that something was about to happen. He stood motionless, just staring at the dilapidated Freddy's in the rain for a moment. He thought to himself that this very well might be the last time he ever sees or sets foot in a Freddy's. All those years of work, just for it all to end like this. Still, he won. This last vestige of his old life would be the last thing he would need to walk away from before he could focus entirely on his new life. Soon, not only would he have his son and daughter back, he would be completely free to continue his experiments on his own terms. He had yet to find all the limits on this new function of life, and he was excited to test those limits without interference or the looming shadow of Henry anymore. He breathed in deeply, and as he exhaled, a smile crept upon his face. That would make this all worth it. Henry knowing he had won. He walked into the abandoned Freddy's with that confidence as he headed towards the sealed safe room. As he carefully opened the hidden room, he flipped on the lights and saw it. There it was. Leaned up against a wall near the back corner was his old spring Bonnie suit, the one he had used himself twice all those years ago. He knelt down beside it and ran a hand along the damp, patchy fur. It was becoming discolored, and patches of the fur lining were wearing off from the constant drip of water from above via the long leaking roof of the abandoned pizzeria. But it was still largely intact. A part of him almost didn't want to admit it, but William had felt some level of regret that he no longer needed to don his old suit again. Ralph's unexpected death had been the cause of that, which was also why he was so careful, even now. Clearly, one of the spirits in the animatronics was angry and powerful enough to lash out at him, and even kill him. William knew he would share that same fate or worse if he wasn't careful. It was then that William realized that in his daydreaming, he had completely forgotten to take his dolly from the van. As he turned to go back for it, he felt a slow wave of cold air flow around him. He stopped and stared at the empty doorway. Just at the edge of the dim light from above, he suddenly made out the rough, wispy silhouettes of what looked like children? He couldn't make out much more detail than that from his position, but the more he stared, the more sure he was in what he was seeing. 4 distinct shadowy figures of children, all lining the wide doorway. His heart began to race as a sense of both fear and excitement gripped him. This was something in all of his experimenting he had never seen. Full-body apparitions of what he assumed was the souls of the children? Likely the 4 he had just recently recovered from this very building. But how and why they were appearing to him now, he had no idea. But given what had recently happened to Ralph and what his own position was at this moment, he had to assume it was nothing good. As his mind was racing, trying to think of what exactly he needed to do in this situation, a 5th shadowy figure came into the room from behind the others. This one felt different from the others. As he looked towards where its eyes would be, the fear he had felt before could be compared to a trickle to the now river he felt as the sheer hate that emanated from this thing poured into the room. Before he could even think, the figure made a beeline straight for him. Reacting out of pure fear, he ran from the figure to the side of the room, but it followed just a few feet behind him. He tried to make a dash for the door, but it was as if the 4 at the doorway were projecting an invisible wall that froze his limbs when he tried to run past. With the figure almost at his back again, he turned and frantically ran to the other side of the room. He needed to think of something, and quick. As he ran to the other wall, he saw the spring Bonnie suit out of the corner of his eye and had an idea rush into his mind. If he donned the suit he had killed them in, maybe it could offer some level of protection against them. Not even taking a moment to second-guess himself, William made a dash for the suit and frantically heaved it upright and opened it before quickly climbing in. It had been years since this suit was last maintained, and these old spring-lock suits had always been finicky. The suit creaked and scratched at the joints and hinges as he moved in it, but it did still work. He turned to see where the figure that had been chasing him had gone to, and noticed that it now stood only a few feet away. He still could make out a face, but he felt a murderous glare coming from that figure. But still, the figure came no closer. William straightened himself upright in the suit as he began to laugh. A laugh of both relief and triumph. His gut was right. The suit itself seemed to have some power over them. Or perhaps it emanated a power on its own that kept them at bay? Either way, He knew now that as long as he wore the suit, he would be safe from these angered souls. But suddenly, in the middle of his laughing, he was instantly hit with a flash of immense pressure all over his body simultaneously. The sound of his own bones breaking filled his ears first, before the rush of an all-consuming pain did. Pain. That was all he could think now. Not how this happened, or how to stop it, or anything else. In this moment, he was crippled by an all-consuming pain. He slowly lost the strength, or even the ability, to stand before falling back and hitting his back against the wall behind him. He twitched and writhed in this all-consuming pain, but slowly a thought bitterly forced itself into his mind. He was still inside the suit. Even now, should the pain and damage not stop, and if he actually died here, he would become more powerful than he could ever be in life. If he had the ability to laugh at the realization of that thought, he would have in this moment. But the constant rush of pain had a long while yet before it loosened its grip on him. Even as he could hear the blood pouring out of the suit and onto the stained porcelain floor, he knew that if he died here, he would be back. If he died here, he would always be back. With that, the last thing William saw was a flash of lightning come from the main show area before the light went out. In that same flash of light, he thought he saw a pair of eyes in the figure who had been chasing him. They were the last things he saw before he leaned back against the wall and closed his own eyes. The harsh digital whine of an alarm clock was the thing that pulled Michael from his uneventful sleep. He leaned over and slapped his hand roughly on top of the clock, apparently missing the snooze button. Michael groaned as he tried again. This time he was more precise, and the harsh whine of the alarm stopped. Slowly sitting up, he rubbed his face and cleared his eyes to look at the clock. It was indeed 6 a.m. Michael hazily walked to the kitchen. The only thought on his mind at the moment was whether he wanted orange juice or coffee for the moment. By the time he reached the fridge, he decided this morning was going to be an orange juice morning. Hazily, he opened the refrigerator and grabbed the carton of juice. He closed the door of the fridge, but before he completely turned away, his eyes caught a glimpse of a picture held by a magnet to the door. Pausing to look at it more clearly, he suddenly remembered what the picture was and where it was taken. It was a portrait of the Afton family and Charlie with her mother. They were all posed together on the beach during their trip to that amusement park in Florida. It was a beautiful day, and each of them stood arms on each other's shoulders as they smiled at the camera as Henry took the picture. Michael's first thought was how odd it was looking at such a lively picture from a happier time, as he stood in their family home that was now so quiet he could hear a pin drop in the attic. This was from their family trip they had taken together to celebrate the upcoming opening of Freddy's. Looking at it now from where he stood felt like looking into another world, or another universe even. So much had changed since then, and that was one of the last truly happy memories he had. It had been years since then, and now it was only him and his father. First they lost his brother to his own stupidity from a childhood prank with his friends, and then his sister Elizabeth died in an accident from that clown animatronic from his father's failed pizzeria. It wasn't long after that his own mother first went to stay with a friend while seeing a specialist in another city. What was just at first a weekend away became a permanent separation from him and his father. He visited her often in the years since, but it always seemed too much to ask her to come back. Every time he saw her, he would tell now that she was so much happier than she was before, despite not noticing how truly sad she had become at the time. He did feel brave enough to bluntly ask if she was officially leaving him and his dad at one point. He remembered she had no better answer after a long pause than no, but that she was here now and had no intention of coming home. He never heard any yelling or fighting from them at the time. If anything, he only remembered how quiet they were with each other just before she left. As with most people in Michael's life, he had the sense that there were things that both wanted to be said to each other, but for whatever reason were not. After a few minutes of these thoughts swirling in his head, Michael snapped out of his reminiscing when he realized he left the fridge door open. After closing it, he poured his juice, put the carton back in the fridge, and then sat down on the chair in the living room. As he sipped his juice, he looked at the phone in the kitchen to his right. No flashing lights meant no new messages or missed calls. It had been a month since he last saw his father. When that security guard had died to the kids inside the animatronics, his father had made a change of plans. Thankfully, the first half of the plan was then no longer necessary. Michael knew what that would have meant. A repeat of what had to happen last time at the reopened Freddy's. He had helped with that too. Part of him knew how horrible what they were doing was, but part of him still felt the same intense guilt he had felt since his brother died. He and his friends had killed him over a stupid prank. That whole week prior he had spent bullying his brother over being afraid of the animatronics at Freddy's, hiding throughout the house only to scare him when he wasn't looking. All of this ending in his death at his own birthday party when they held him up to Fredbear for a kiss. Michael could feel a tear well up and fall down his face. He almost forgot how much of the guilt was still eating at him. There was an almost constant reminder in the back of his mind about it, so it wasn't until he was actively thinking about that day in particular that he was moved to the point of tears. He took a moment to wipe his eyes with his sleeve. All of it. All of the horrible things he and his father had been doing over the years. All of it would be worth it if they could bring him back. Maybe even his sister, too. Michael wasn't sure exactly how it all worked. From what his father had explained to him a handful of times over the years, he knew that souls were real, they could attach to physical things, and that they could be called to attach themselves to things, if done properly. He always got the sense that his father wasn't telling him everything, though. That he knew more about how it all worked than what he was telling him. Michael had just always figured that he was sparing him the worst of the details Michael had largely already worked out for himself, or at least so he thought. He was no idiot. He knew what happened to those kids at the reopened Freddy's, and why. He knew what happened to those kids who went missing back in '85. He knew it was all for the end goal of bringing his brother and sister back. Since his brother's death was his own fault, he kept reminding himself he had no room to try and question his father over what he had done, what they had to do. He had known that since those experiments with nightmares his father had done on him after his brother died. All of it was done with the goal of learning how to bring back what they had lost. Michael needed to come back to that thought occasionally over the years whenever he was having doubts over what they were doing. If all of this ended in a way for him to apologize to his brother and get the forgiveness of both him and his father, he could finally be at peace. He never said the words outright to him, but ever since his brother died and how they interacted ever since, Michael could hear it in his voice, see it in his eyes, watch it in his actions and in his body language. He knew he blamed him for it, and rightfully so. Again, he reminded himself, he wasn't an idiot. After downing his glass, he stood up and started pacing around the house. He must be missing something, or something had to have gone wrong. The plan was for his father to disable and disassemble the old animatronics, take them down to the workshop, and then go back for the golden bodysuit at the abandoned Freddy's. He went back for the suit after bringing the parts and pieces of the old animatronics down to the workshop behind the rental service, and then it was supposed to be over. After that, his father would be free to take all the time he needed to figure out how to bring his brother back. From what he had said recently, too, he was apparently close to a breakthrough. He just needed the souls of these kids to finish testing it. Not that Michael had seen any of this. Michael knew he wouldn't be of much help with any of that. All he cared about was that all of this led to it working, to them being able to bring his siblings back. If that could happen, he could potentially see himself swallowing his hesitance and perhaps helping his father figure out how to use this science to do some good in the world. Especially if they could figure out how to do it less morbidly. But until then, he had never pushed his father to learn how it all worked, and he himself didn't seem to be in a rush to teach him either. But here he was a month later, and his father was nowhere to be seen. His father had mentioned it might be dangerous for him being near those animatronics controlled by the spirits of those kids he had killed all those years ago. He said that he left a set of instructions to a Plan B at the house if he didn't come back. He never said where the Plan B was or how long he should wait until reading it, though. His father had always left notes and messages for him when he wasn't around, so he assumed this would be no different. But since his father hadn't come back after that last night out, Michael had turned their house upside down, looking anywhere and everywhere for this Plan B he had been left. He had done this 3 times in the past month and eventually resigned himself to the fact that nothing had been left for him. With nothing else to do, he had spent this past week just waiting. Waiting for nothing, he said aloud to himself from the chair he was sitting in. In bored desperation, he got up from his chair to go over all the voicemails on the answering machine for the 10th time when he heard a knock on the door. His heart almost jumped out of his throat when he heard it. It felt louder than it really was because of just how quiet the house was. He quickly walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. He didn't see anyone at the door, oddly enough. Just to be sure, he opened the door and looked around. There was no one to be seen. Confused, Michael took a few steps off the porch and looked down their long driveway. Again, he didn't see anything. As he headed back inside, confused and defeated, he noticed the letterbox on the door. He had almost forgotten they had that. He checked inside in desperation, and to his surprise, there was a letter inside. It was from his father. He had sent a letter to their own home, and from what the envelope said, had it held for a month before being delivered. It was addressed to him with a big notice of "Do not open until" today's date on the front. Quickly, Michael went back inside and tore the letter open. This had to be his Plan B. As he stood in the living room, he unfolded the letter and started reading. Michael, if you are reading this, then something must have gone wrong at the abandoned Freddy's. I could have been overpowered by any of the children in the animatronics. I could have had an accident and been surrounded by them. I could have had one or more of their spirits following me and trying everything they can to kill me, or something even I can't think of caught me off guard, and I'm not safe to be around now. Under no circumstances are you to go back to the abandoned Freddy's to try and retrace my steps to find me. I have a few backup plans for myself in any case. If they did have something to do with my absence, they undoubtedly are going to be agitated, or worse. Agitated and free to roam as unbound spirits. If you tried to go there now, they would undoubtedly do the same to you as they have now done to me. If they find you, they can follow you for as long as they wish, at least without any mitigating circumstances, which is possibly the position I am in now. We need to finish this, Michael. I am so close to a breakthrough. Whatever my situation is now, I need you to finish what I started. I've been working on fixing your sister for a while now. I know you will have questions, but there is no time to explain here. Just know she is broken, and I've been trying to put her back together. But now, I can no longer put her back together myself. Down in the basement, at the back of my workshop, go to the bookshelf. Find the old storybook with Humpty Dumpty your mother and I used to read you all at night. Behind it, you will find a button. Press it and ride the elevator down to my secret entrance to the rental service. The hand unit will guide you from there. Find her, Michael. Put her back together. After reading the letter, Michael needed to reread it several times before the message really began to sink in. Several thoughts began racing in his head. He expected that his father would have planned for something like this, but this was an unusual level of detail for even him to get. Usually, Michael was only told what he needed to know, and with how much detail was included in this letter, his first thought was that all of this info must have been necessary for him to know, in his father's eyes. But the most glaring thing in the letter was what he kept coming back to. I have been working on fixing your sister for a while now. He repeated the line over and over again in his head. I have been working on fixing your sister for a while now. What did he mean by that? How long? What did he mean by fixing her? Did he have a way to call her soul back in a way he couldn't for his brother? Above all of these, though, he wondered why his father had not told him any of this. He was always light on details as it suited him, but this was outright hiding something from him. It shows he didn't trust him, even as little as he thought before. That felt like an insult to Michael the more and more these thoughts swam in his head. After all he had done with his father for years, he still can't trust him? Had he not shown his father that he was just as committed to bringing his brother back as his father was? Apparently not. Not if his father still felt the need to keep secrets from him. But he shook away these thoughts of anger and betrayal out of his mind. He needed to focus on the task at hand. His father had still given him a mission, and while he was determined to press his father on explanations when he found him again, he was determined to put his sister back together, whatever that meant. How long had he been lying? He had thought that she had been kidnapped, that she just happened to disappear the opening day of his father's standalone pizzeria. Always seemed like an unfortunate coincidence to him. But the more he thought about it now in retrospect, the more he wondered if something was going on. Did his father know more about what happened to her than he was telling him? He was sure he wouldn't hurt her. He loved her more than himself and his brother, and made no effort to hide it even at the time. But after this letter, he kept coming back to memories like this, and going over his father's actions with a more critical eye, noticing odd things that he thought mundane at the time. Taking a moment to breathe, Michael tried to empty his mind for a moment to slow his racing thoughts down. He set the letter on the table beside his chair and closed his eyes. After a few moments, he focused on the task at hand and went over what he knew. Whatever was going on, his father was close to saving his sister. Somehow. He had assumed, like everyone else, that she had died years ago after she disappeared. But somehow his father knew she was in fact dead, and found a way to call her soul. But it was seemingly broken, somehow? William was in the process of fixing her before whatever happened to him at Freddy's. Despite how increasingly frustrated and critical of William he was becoming, he knew ignoring his warning about returning to Freddy's to look for him was a bad idea. There is every possibility that the souls of these children were indeed after his father now, and he couldn't risk them finding him either. Besides, he did want to help his sister. Going over the letter a few times more just to be sure, William made no mention of how she was broken, how he was fixing her, and how he expected Michael to know how to put her back together. only instructions leading him down his secret entrance to the rental service, and that hand unit would guide him from there. He had used it a few times before in the handful of times William had taken him down there. It was some interface for employees that assigned tasks. He was sure William would have some pre-installed tasks for him. Folding the letter and putting it in his pocket, he took one last deep breath before heading downstairs to find this elevator. After a bit of searching, he did indeed find the elevator. He found it and the hand unit inside. As he descended down, it activated and, just as William said, it began giving him instructions. He spent the first day shocking the animatronics. It took him days to do all the tasks it had for him. So after so long each day, he would take the elevator back up to their home each night. But even before then, on his first night, he was guided to the Circus Baby Auditorium by hand unit before it had to reboot the entire facility's power. As he stood in the darkness, a voice spoke to him. He had heard her speak a few times before over the years, but this time she seemed much more sapient, like she was an actual person. It was that Circus Baby animatronic. She helped guide him through the rest of his week. She said if he followed the instructions of hand unit, he would die. She also said she learned to pretend. Michael didn't know what to think as he kept progressing through the facility each night. He had yet to see any sign of his sister, but he knew William had sent him down here for a reason. He told him to put her back together, and he was determined to do exactly that, for her sake at least. By the end of his week, he felt as if he was a pawn caught between whatever hand unit and Circus Baby were trying to achieve, and that each of them was using him to further some unknown goal. But he had little choice in any of this. His sister had to be down here somewhere. It wasn't until his 5th night that he found her. Circus Baby was sitting on a conveyor, half empty, as she spoke to him. She reminded him about when she explained how she learned to pretend to him earlier in the week, before saying she couldn't let the cameras see her move. By this point, he was wondering if his sister had attached her soul to this animatronic, or if this was something Circus Baby was only pretending to string him along further. She said she had something bad in her, and she wanted him to save what is good. She asked him to take a chip from her and put it into his handheld device. She referred to both the chip and the animatronic as herself, whoever she was. Over this week, she had moments where she almost sounded like his sister, but then others when she went back to sounding like Circus Baby. She and hand unit clearly had their own goals. He knew both of them were playing him, but he just wasn't sure how. There had to be a catch to all of this. If there was a chance his sister's soul really was in this chip somehow, he knew he was better off taking her now. In truth, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Whatever was going on would be made clear to him either way. So he followed her directions into the scooping room, and there he was scooped. A husk. An immortal husk of a man is what he had become that day. The tangle of wires that crawled inside of him after being scooped piloted him completely for several days. With half his organs gone, he had no idea for sure how he was still alive. He knew that the souls of those William had killed had to be involved somehow. But how exactly they were keeping him from death, he had no idea. He could sleep, and it was the one thing he felt the need for after so long. He could go for days without it and still be perfectly alert, unlike before. But eventually his energy would get so low that he would almost feel forced to sleep after so many days. He could eat and drink, and occasionally felt the urge to. But with half his organs gone, it ended up making such a mess, he eventually stopped and realized he didn't need to. He could shower, but No matter how hard he scrubbed, he would always end up smelling like an awful mixture of hot metal and rotting flesh. He was only alive in the loosest of terms. He doesn't remember what the mess of wires inside of him was doing during that time, but it seemed like his body quickly started to fall apart just from their sheer presence. His skin became discolored and even fell off in chunks in places. He became gaunt and thin across his body. The first thing he was conscious of after that tangle of wires was gone was that he was on the sidewalk in town in broad daylight. Only taking a moment to appreciate control over himself again and the sheer horror of his body, he knew he needed to get out of sight before someone saw him and called for an ambulance. He ran home as quickly as he could, slammed and locked the door behind him, and then collapsed in his bed. He woke in the morning and, looking down at himself, realized it wasn't a dream. He should have been dead, but he wasn't. His lower abdomen was still an open, empty hole where his belly and organs should have been. He didn't like to look at it, but he had to pull himself to look away out of shock. Like watching a car crash just before it happens, he was morbidly fascinated how he was still alive every time he saw it. That first day he spent getting his bearings in the house. He found he could move around and do normal tasks just fine. He didn't feel any stronger or weaker than before, and all of his other senses seemed to be working normally as well. The only thing, other than the obvious, that seemed out of the ordinary now were his dreams after that first night. Every night he had the same dream. In his dream he stood in the middle of a Freddy's during its prime. As he would look around, he came to notice he was surrounded in a circle by children in the darkness. 4 at first, but after a few nights, a 5th appeared, further than the rest in the darkness. In the darkness, he couldn't quite see if they were a boy or girl, but their dimly glowing eyes made them stand apart from the rest. Each night he would try to speak to each of them, asking them what was going on, why this dream felt so real, and why he kept having it. It didn't take him long to realize that these must be the souls of the victims of his father that he was injected with. Or at least a part of them, as he would come to find later. Regardless of what he said, though, the dream would always end the same. The children would rush out from the darkness and take turns attacking him. They were impossibly fast and strong, and no matter what he did each night, his dream always ended with him curled on the ground while being attacked by the children. He would wake panicked and even occasionally with new scratches and cuts that would never heal. He wondered if that was something the souls in him were directly causing, or if it was just that his body could no longer actually heal physically. After that first day, he didn't know what to do or where to go or even who to trust. Would his old friends understand, or would they panic? Should he try to go to a doctor privately? No matter what he thought of, he quickly would shoot it down because he couldn't trust any of them, at least fully with a secret like this. There was nobody he could think of that was left that he could trust completely. His family was dead or gone. No, not all of them. His mother. His mother, out of anyone on the planet, would be someone he could trust completely. He realized he hadn't visited in months, and that it had been weeks since his usual call, too. He would have a lot of explaining to do. But at this point, he couldn't think of anything else to do at this point, and besides that, she deserved to know. It had already ate at him for years, keeping his father's secret from her. But now that he was certain his father had either planned this, or knew about the danger in saving his sister and chose not to tell him, this was the final straw. Yes, he resolved in his mind, he would finally tell her everything. Covering himself from head to foot, with the hood up on his jacket, he got in his van and drove the 3.5 hours to Provo up north where his mother lived. He had waited until the evening under the cover of darkness. With one last deep breath, he knocked on the door and waited.
"There he is,"
she said after opening the door. She stepped out to hug him and thankfully, Michael thought, didn't notice his face, stomach, or smell yet. He hugged her back, just happy to be around the one person in the world where trust and love was shared without expectations. After a moment, they stepped back and she got a better look at his face. Her smile quickly turned to a frown.
"Michael, what's wrong? I got your voicemail earlier, but I was staying a bit later at work and I only saw it about an hour ago. You didn't say what was going on, though, and you look like you haven't slept in days."
She paused for a moment and kept staring at his face. But before Michael could think of what to say, she already spoke again in a lower, more serious tone.
"Michael, what's wrong? Are you sick? Your skin looks discolored and you smell like—" "Mom, just calm down and listen. A lot has happened over the past couple weeks, and I need you to try your best not to panic. Let's sit down and I'll explain everything, I promise,"
Michael said, cutting her off. Without taking her eyes off of him, she stepped back to open the door wider as she said,
"Okay, sweetie, let's sit down and you can tell me what's going on."
He followed her into the living room of her apartment, and she closed and locked the door behind him. It was a cozy little apartment, and in his mind almost felt like an extension of their home that just happened to be located in a city upstate. Neither of them spoke for a moment, but then, slowly, Michael began the long story of explaining all that had happened at their home since she left. He had held nothing back now. There was no need to sugarcoat the actions of William anymore. He simultaneously felt the relief in telling someone what he had been carrying for all these years, and also in admitting his own part in these actions. At first she asked the odd question or two earlier in his story,
"Where was your father at the time?"
Or
"Why would he do that?"
Or even
"And you did what now?"
But after a while, she became quiet and only listened patiently as he continued. Though she was quiet, he could tell she was bursting at the seams with questions as time went on, or that she was in doubt or perhaps denial. As he started to explain what William had done a decade ago and his own part in it, she stayed quiet through it all. She wasn't even looking at him anymore as he told her what happened in 83, then 85, 87, all the experiments up to this year in 93, and what had almost happened again at the last Freddy's. His mother stayed quiet and remained looking at the ground. The color was draining from her face. Whatever she was holding back before seems to be gone at this point, as she seemed to slowly accept what she had feared in the back of her mind all along. He then explained the events of the last month, how a letter came from William telling him to go down to the bunker without him this time, to put her back together. He told her about how he saved her from the circus animatronic that was holding her, that he saved her by taking a chip containing her soul. She only briefly looked up to see the chip in his hand with a look of pain and dread on her face. He then told her how he was led to a scooper, how the souls of William's victims desperately wanted to be free at any cost, how he didn't blame them, really, for what they did next. As he slowly took off his hood, he revealed his hairless, dark, almost purplish skin. She immediately looked away and covered her eyes. The tears were flowing as she only made it to the corner of the living room before she held the corner and collapsed to the floor as a mess of tears and sobs. Michael, after a moment, went to her and sat next to her before holding her. It was several minutes of quiet, only broken by the occasional sob of his mother. As she slowly calmed, he said the only thing he could think of.
"I'm still here, Mom. I'm still here. I don't know exactly how, but I'm still me.
He paused for a few moments before continuing.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. I'm paying for it now. This is my...
No, don't you dare say that. You loved him, and he loved you. I miss him so much. I've missed him for years. I miss Elizabeth. I won't lose you too. I can't. His mother interjected as she tried to clear her strained voice. You did everything you thought you had to do right by him. You have nothing to apologize for. He wouldn't want you like this, she continued after another moment. Well, what do we do now? She asked. Michael took in a deep breath and let it out. I need to find him. He's out there somewhere. If anyone can stop him now, it's me. I need to try to stop what I helped him to become. Nobody else will help us or even believe us. We have to find him on our own. His mother also took in a deep breath before saying, Okay, where do we start?
Well, hey, I'll let you know if I see any more. Most of those internet resellers got a hold of all my good stuff years ago. I never really bothered keeping any of it aside because it moved so fast at auction and always bid well when it did. I'll let you know if I see anything else Fredbear related or whatever. I've got your number.
It's fat, Michael is able to say before being cut off from a deadline. Breathing a sigh of frustration, he hangs up the phone and walks back to the living room to sit down in his chair. His mother, who was sitting on the couch next to him, didn't even look up from her reading as she said, Another dead end, it sounds like, then. Yep, said Michael as he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. At least the last auction house actually had stuff to look through. I hate to admit it, but it's getting to the point where I might have to go back to asking random collectors online to look through their collections. Which is pointless, because if any of them did have him, they either wouldn't be able to shut up about it and we would have heard about it by now, or would have turned him over to the police when they found his body, or he would have killed them when they tried, or, if he isn't able to move on his own, could be in any random storage unit, barn, house, or garage in the country in some forgotten collection we'll never know about, said Michael in a frustrated voice. They both had been all over these points time after time after time over the last 30 years of searching. They both knew by heart the challenge and problems of trying to find him. They hadn't spent every waking moment of those 30 years in the pursuit of William. They had made sure to take time, at his mother's insistence, to also try and find some way to fix himself, to go back to some form of normality. But every mystic, medium, or priest that they tried to get advice from either didn't believe them outright, or, in the few instances they did grow to trust them enough to show Michael to them, would invariably panic, think it was some elaborate hoax, or question their own sanity. Michael had grown to accept over the years that if there was a way out of his predicament, they had no way of learning how to take it, and experimenting with himself to try to seemed exceedingly risky and something his mother outright refused. Deep down, though, Michael had long thought of the implications of what this meant. He opened his eyes and looked over at his mother. She had aged fairly gracefully over the decades, but the passage of time was clear to him on her. From her now silver blonde hair to the beginnings of wrinkles around her eyes, she was getting older. Michael, despite having half an empty chest with no remaining hair and a discolored, half-rotting body, he still hadn't aged a day. He had the same body he did when this happened to him when he was 23. This year, he had a somber celebration with his mother for his 53rd birthday. He remembered she had brought takeout from a nice Italian restaurant, and they played board games into the night, as was tradition. Some years he had even spent them with his old friends, but that was more recent, as it took years upon years to convince his mother that they could be trusted and would want to help them. He had noticed that even when she eventually relented, She was always a bit distant and cold to them when Michael eventually did reveal himself to each and convince them to help him on his own. It didn't take Michael long to realize why. While she had forgiven him for what he did to his brother, he got the sense that she was less willing to so quickly forgive them for their parts in what happened. Still, he had eventually shown her that they all regretted what had happened and were more than willing to help them both look for William, and it was help that they certainly needed to check anywhere and everywhere they could think of. This year, though, they had spent this birthday together, which Michael was more keen to do the more he noticed how old his mother was getting. He hated the thought of it, but the inevitable conclusion of what was going to happen eventually if his mother kept aging while he never did always found a way to sneak into the back of his mind. He was determined to spend as much time with her as he could, and that was all he would allow himself to think of, though, because he knew following the thoughts of what happens after held nothing good, and he still needed to be focused.
"Business as usual on that front, then," she said calmly, clearly unsurprised about all that Michael had just said.
She had continued reading from William's old notes and experiment files without lifting her eyes as she spoke.
"And I'm guessing no new leads from anything he wrote either then, also?"
asked Michael as he leaned back and stared up at the ceiling.
"Nothing that would have told us where he went, no,"
she said after a brief pause as she kept reading. They both sat in silence for a few moments as Michael stared at the ceiling fan spinning above him. He had long been mentally exhausted by their task, but it was almost like his mother became more committed as the years went by.
"Well, I guess I'll call the others and tell them we need to go back to bothering collectors then,"
Michael said dejectedly. Suddenly, his mother perked up as he said that, as if she had only been half paying attention up to this point, and said,
"Oh, don't bother, sweetie,"
she said as she set the files and papers down and grabbed the rolled-up newspaper she had sitting beside her. As she stood and walked towards him, she unfolded it and flipped it to a page halfway through the newspaper. She folded it back on itself with this new page on the front and dropped the new page on Michael's lap. Michael's eyes widened as he read the title. Fazbear's Fright Horror Attraction to open within the month, seeking new employees to join in on the scares. Michael quickly picked up the paper and read the brief article once, and then twice as his mother stood there patiently.
"Is this his doing? That Mr. Burroughs? Did he gather up investors again?"
Michael said as he hunched over reading the paper again for a third time intently.
"Not from what I found, no. I still have no idea where he is or what he's doing. He's also a loose thread that warrants revisiting, though, as William made it clear in his journal that he suspected that he was planning on blackmailing him over what he had done. If that's true, then Mr. Burroughs was more than happy to leverage the death of those kids to his own gain. But no, it isn't him. It's Henry," said his mother like a teacher explaining something to her star student. Michael stopped reading at hearing that name and looked up at her. "Henry? Are you sure? He's been off the grid for decades. We've never been able to find him. Why would he come out of hiding after all this time?"
said Michael as his mind raced and rattled off questions as they popped into his head.
"Excellent questions,"
said his mother like an impressed teacher.
"But I have no idea. It's him for sure, though. I already called the Secretary of State before you came downstairs to see who started this Fazbear's Fright nonsense. Sure enough, Henry Emily. He's up to something, but I have no idea what or why. At least now, we have something real to work with," she said confidently. "So, what do we do from here?" asked Michael.
His mother clearly had a plan already worked out, and was too excited to hear her plan to notice the paper was from 3 days ago.
"That's the simple part. The paper says itself right there. They're looking for a part-time night shift security guard. That's the perfect way for you to go check out the building in person without raising any alarm or being watched over by someone else. While you're doing that, I'll do more digging on Henry to try and find out what he's up to, where he is, and why he's doing this now. That way, we're coming at whatever he's planning from both sides. One way or the other, one of us will find what is going on," she said confidently.
Michael had to admit the plan was pretty bulletproof, and she clearly had thought it out very well.
I guess it's settled then. I'll ask. Already done. I drove over an hour ago and picked up an application already. It's on the kitchen table for you,"
interjected his mother. Michael nodded in approval as he stood up.
"Thanks, Mom. You saved me a call and some time. I'll start filling it out then."
He gave her a quick hug and a few pats on the back before he continued on to the kitchen. She stood there for a moment after he left, lost in thought, before heading back to the couch. As she sat down and went back to reading the blueprint of the scooper that did something to her son, she still needed to know more. By the next week, Trisha kept digging through the business records of this new Fazbear's Fright operation. She tracked down the owner, who turned out to be a 20-ish-year-old half-wit with big ideas on turning a profit from these decades-old tragedies. As she called his home phone that was listed in his business registration, she eventually asked how he didn't get sued by Fazbear for copyright infringement for using their assets, names, and characters. He was more than proud to explain that one of the Fazbear heads had actually contacted him and offered him a license to run a horror attraction after they heard about his previous successful haunted houses. Even more curious now, she asked if she still had the number and name of whoever from Fazbear contacted him. He was a bit confused, but ultimately gave her a number and a name she was already expecting. Henry Emily. She took that number and checked all the local phone companies until she got a match. The operator asked what she needed, and Trisha explained that she was Henry's wife and was calling to make sure the phone bill for the home address was paid this month. The operator didn't suspect a thing, and Trisha's lie worked. The operator read out Henry's home address to confirm if that's the one she was talking about. Saying yes with a grin on her face, she quickly jotted down the address that she heard and soon after thanked the operator for confirming the phone bill was paid for that month. As she thanked the operator and hung up the phone, she leaned back on the couch and thought for a moment. Henry had intentionally dropped off the face of the earth since '93. She and Michael had made on and off attempts to try and find him over the years, never to any success, as he had enough time, skill, and money to disappear anywhere in the world he wanted for all they knew. But now that he was making moves through Fazbear, she only needed this one lead to find him, and now she had his address. After poring over a few maps, it turned out that Henry didn't move to the other side of the earth, but just to the other end of the city. In a disgruntled sigh, she was somewhat frustrated to find out how close he had been to them all these years. "I guess it turns out that's one more thing you two had in common. Keeping the simple simple and the complicated complicated," she said aloud to herself. She began to wonder now how this interaction would go. What would she say? In the end, though, she decided to keep the simple simple. She had done the hard part, finding him. She may as well now just go to him and talk, and from there, play the cards as they lay. The chime of his doorbell pulled Henry out of his concentrated welding. He lifted his mask as he looked upwards towards the front door. He was mentally on alert at this point as he quickly walked over to his desk and grabbed his tablet. He quickly checked his home security app to pull up the live camera feed. It appeared to be an older woman about his age. Instantly, he breathed an annoyed sigh of relief. More than likely, this was someone else trying to sell him something, or a census taker or some such. In this moment, he realized how long it had actually been since he had any real visitors. It hadn't been very lively in this house since his wife had left him all those years ago. At the time, she said that he never truly got over the death of their daughter. She grieved for her every day, but Henry was stuck living in the past, living in the shadow of his old partner in a desperate attempt to prove to not only her, but the whole world, that he was responsible. In the end, though,
he only succeeded in alienating himself further from everyone else in his life, including her. He had forgotten exactly how many years it had been since she left. He could have sworn it was before 2000 at some point, but he wasn't sure exactly. Time bore little meaning to him now besides the advancement of technology. Technology he could use to find him. The ringing of the doorbell again pulled him out of his deep thought. He set down the tablet and quickly made his way to the front door, scuttling past the empty remains of takeout dinners and half-finished projects that cluttered his living room. He made his way to his front door and quietly peered through the peephole. "What's your business?" he said in a loud but raspy voice just before the woman went to ring the doorbell again. He hadn't intended to sound so rough, but he had forgotten how long it had been since he actually used his voice. Yes, I'm looking for Mr. Emily? I had a lot of questions about Fazbear I was hoping to ask him," said the woman towards the door. "If you're another one of those resellers, go away. You people already stripped those old buildings to the studs to profit off of tragedy. The least you could do is leave me alone. How do you people keep finding me?" he replied in anger. Half expecting some angry words in response, he was genuinely stunned after the woman replied following a moment of silence. "Our greatest accomplishment is showing the world the joy of creation." After a moment's pause, the sound of unlatching bolts, chains, and even a heavy bar being lifted came from the other side. Only a moment or two of silence followed before the door slowly opened. Henry stood dazed by the bright light that came flooding into his home. But despite that, the silhouette of the woman standing in front of him was unmistakable, even after all these years. His eyes had yet to focus on the woman in front of him when he asked, "Trisha?" As his eyes adjusted to the light, the woman said, "Hi, Hen. It's been a while." The two stood there for a moment, just staring at each other in silence. After a few drawn-out seconds, Henry finally blurted out, You got old." Her smile turning to a frown, Trisha shot back with, "And you're a mess. How does Jenny stand to have you looking like this?" Henry could feel as if a weight fell out of his stomach at the mention of her name. "Well, she doesn't. Or didn't. Or we've got a lot to talk about," Henry said after a moment of silence. Looking surprised for a moment, her face seemed to change as she thought for a moment and then shifted to sadness. "Oh, Hen, I'm sorry," was all she was able to say as she paused for a moment to put a hand on his shoulder before walking inside. Realizing she hadn't been invited in, while also realizing she knew that she didn't have to, a quick smile came to Henry's face before he closed the door behind them. Trisha shuffled past the mess that was Henry's living room to a couch cluttered with milk crates full of various parts for what looked like multiple disassembled radios. Sighing to herself, she picked it up and set it and the crate next to it on top of a tote that was on the other side of the couch. As she sat on the now open space on the couch, Henry walked past and sat on his chair adjacent to the couch. It was the one piece of furniture he kept uncluttered after all these years. As he sat, Henry apologized. "Sorry for the mess, it's—" "Hen, you're fine. I get it, and to be honest with you, all of the men in my life have been more similar than different for as long as I've known them, including Michael now, too," she said, half amused and half annoyed. "Michael?" said Henry to himself. "How is he? I haven't seen him for a long time," he ended in a sadder tone. Trisha looked like she was trying to find the exact words she was looking for before finally saying, "He's with me. And he was hurt very bad by some machine down in his workshop. He sent him down there to Elizabeth back together? To bring her back somehow. I don't know if it was real or a trap or what, but whatever that thing was hurt him and made him...
She paused for a moment to swallow her growing grief. After a moment she continued.
He can't die. Or he did? But he's still alive, even though his body isn't?
She finished with a bit of confusion. Henry didn't seem terrified, though, or sad. He seemed curious, almost impressed. So, he actually figured it out. Huh, said Henry to himself, lost in thought. After a moment, he looked up back at Trisha. I'm guessing he's told you most of this? He asked more flatly, clearly still lost in thought.
And the rest we've pieced together after the fact. It happened to him back in '93, so we've had a lot of time to work through this since, she said.
So why are you here then? What have you two been doing for all these years? Annoyed, Trisha retorted with a slightly sharper response.
You know, I was thinking about asking you that same question. What have you been doing for all these years? You were out of the picture long before we were.
The words seemed to sting harder than she had intended, and when she saw Henry's face soften, she had a slight sense of regret in saying them like that. Same as you, I suppose. Looking for him. Then research. Coping. But that's been since... His voice trailed off. After a few moments of silence hung in the air before Trisha finally spoke again.
Hen, please tell me you've learned something more about all this. Tell me there's a way to fix Michael. We've tried for years to find answers, but you are the only one left in the world besides him that would possibly know how.
Trisha said in a softer, more quiet tone. She was almost pleading with him. Henry stared back at her blankly for a moment before slowly closing his eyes, leaning back his head and taking a deep breath in and out. Without facing her or even looking at her, he began to speak. Trisha, I've learned a bit about what he was doing, but there's still so much I just don't understand. From what you've said about Michael, given what I think I know about these spirits, they seem to be controlling the old animatronics, like a puppet. The suits themselves aren't alive, they're just controlling them. You said his body was dead, right? My guess is that he also hasn't aged at all since then either, right? Asked Henry. Trisha responded with a quiet, yes. Letting out another slow breath through his nose, Henry continued. Trish, you were always smarter than you let on. I think you know what that means. I think you've known for a while, and you just needed to hear it from me. So I'll say it. His body is dead. His spirit seems to be possessing his own dead body. Whatever happened to him down there caused his soul to possess his own body. There could be more to it, but at its core, that seems to be what happened to him. Trisha. Henry paused for a moment after choking up a little while saying her name again. He braced himself to say what he was now about to say. There's no way to bring him or any of the others back to the way they were. I've been making plans not to bring them back, but to help them move on, to free them from their robotic prisons. If Michael has something similar going on with his own dead body, you both have a choice. He either stays the way he is forever, or he moves on with the rest of us when I finish my plan. Silence hung in the air for a drawn-out minute before it was finally broken by the soft sound of Trisha's crying. They both sat there in Henry's dark, messy living room as Trisha continued to cry for several minutes. After what felt like half an hour, her sobbing eventually quieted down until all was silent again. After another minute of silence, she eventually looked up at Henry with bloodshot eyes.
"What do you mean, us?"
Henry looked back without flinching. He responded as if he had rehearsed what he had said to himself before. "Trish, look at us. We got old. I'm just going through what happens to all of us eventually. I ran out of time. I'm dying. As of 3 weeks ago, my doctor said I've got about 3, maybe 6 months before my body starts failing completely. I thought I had more time to find some way to bring them all back. Maybe there actually is, but it doesn't matter, because either way, I'm out of time. I have to end this with what I know will work while I still can. This is Plan B," he said flatly. Trisha opened her mouth to argue, but before she said anything, she stopped herself. She knew he was right. He was out of time, but not her.
"Hen, I can keep going. Tell me what you've learned, and maybe I can find a way to fix him. If you want to handle the rest, I can understand. But please let me keep trying with Michael," she asked desperately.
"I can't force either of you to do anything, nor would I. If that's what you both want, that's what you both want," Henry said solemnly. He looked over at his table next to his chair. It was littered with all sorts of letters and drawings, but he sifted through a few piles and eventually pulled out a few neat folded papers. "I was planning on just having these mailed to you after the fact and hoping for the best, but now I'm not so sure, Trish. You know what these are?" he asked flatly. He didn't wait for her to respond to his rhetorical question. "This is a stock transfer form. My plan is to move all of my stocks to you after I'm gone. That would make you the majority shareholder of Fazbear. I assume you inherited all of his assets decades ago, when he was declared legally dead, right?" he asked, looking at her. She gave a quick, "Yes," so he could continue. "So you would be the new head of Fazbear. Fazbear Incorporated. Free to do with it as you please," he said bluntly as he dropped the papers back on the table next to his chair without even looking. Leaning forward, he had a more serious tone as he said, "Trisha, I need you to hear me on this. It's not my decision what should happen with Michael. Nor is it really yours either. Ultimately, Michael will have to make that decision himself one day. Maybe he'll even leave with me. But you need to promise me, right here, right now, that if I sign those papers, you will not, under any circumstances, dig any deeper into any of this. Look at the pain he caused for so many, not just the 3 of us, in his pursuit of knowledge. I have no idea how many lives he took before the end. He had years to operate alone, and I'm sure we'll never know exactly. I will only sign them over to you if you promise not to try and pick up where his notes end. We need to end this, not open the chasm wider for bad people like Mr. Burroughs, or even worse than him, to find out how any of this works. I can't help you, Trisha, but you can help me in ending this for all those kids who are still trapped. Promise me, and let's end this together. He ended without ever having broken eye contact with her. The seriousness in his gaze was not lost on her.
I want to, but it's still so hard to hear that there's nothing we can do for them. Especially Michael. He didn't deserve any of this,
she said sadly, almost to herself. Henry winced ever so slightly at her words, but she didn't catch it. She continued.
But I know those children have already suffered enough. If doing this lets them free somehow...
She started to trail off, hoping Henry would continue. He noticed her indirect question and picked up where she left off after clearing his throat with, "From what I know, especially with what really happened with the Murrays, fire seems like the best bet. In the end, it might just be their choice to move on, and the fire only presents the choice, so to speak," he said in a sad but somewhat unsure tone. After a slight nod, she continued.
If doing this gives them the choice to be free, then yes. But it's going to be really hard to accept what that means for Michael.
A few moments of silence hung in the air before she took a big breath in and out.
Okay, yes,
she said to herself before sitting up straight and looking directly at Henry as she cleared her throat.
I promise, Henry, I promise that all of this ends here. I will bury everything Fazbear and destroy the rest once it's done, she said without breaking eye contact.
Henry stared back at her blankly for another moment before turning back to the table next to his chair and grabbing a pen. He flattened the papers on the table before beginning to sign his name. Halfway through, though, he paused and looked up at Trisha and said, not harshly, but seriously, "If you break this promise, even after I'm gone, you will regret it before the end." Without waiting for her response, he turned back to the papers and finished signing them. Trisha was slightly taken aback at his words, but chose to say nothing and let him finish. After a few moments of signing and changing papers, he reshuffled them and held them out to her. "It's done. You are now the majority shareholder of Fazbear Entertainment, Incorporated," he said in a monotone voice.
Okay, let's end this, Hen,
she said as she wiped her eyes, stood, and walked over to Henry to take the held-out papers. Henry stood as he held them out, and after Trisha took them, she hugged him one last time. He returned the hug after a moment, with no words said between them. After a moment, Trisha said,
"Oh,"
in a surprised tone,
"we should tell Michael. He's been at Fazbear's Fright the last 2 weeks to try to find answers there in case I couldn't find you here."
"I thought that might have been him," he said in a happily surprised tone. "You two are efficient, that's for sure. But it is a little odd when he doesn't even show up in person for that interview with that half-wit I have running that operation. He did something similar years ago, but we can check on him now," Henry said as he stepped past her to grab his tablet in the garage. His tone had shifted halfway through what he was saying, and Trisha did pick that up, but again chose to stay silent. She waited for a moment before he returned with the tablet, now showing several live camera feeds from inside Fazbear's Fright. From what the manager messaged me earlier, Michael should have been reunited with his father by now. He's been in there for a few days now, and the way he moves in that old suit, it's him for sure.
What?
Exclaimed Trisha as she leaned over to watch the feed with Henry. Michael quickly pulled up the tablet again after searching his immediate surroundings. It had become a sort of frantic rhythm over the past week. In retrospect, his first few weeks here had been some of his most boring in years. He had had more fun traveling the country with his mother searching through a seemingly endless amount of Fazbear collectors trying to find his father. But now here he was, staring back into the camera every time he saw the light turn on, indicating the camera was being used. What was originally only a gimmick for the patrons was now making survival all the more difficult. For the past few days, Michael had begrudgingly returned each night. Over the weekend, he had expressed doubts to his mother that this fool would find anything useful. But she insisted on returning as it had to have the approval of Henry to operate, and that alone made spending some extra time here to find any connection to him without arousing suspicion worth it. It was on the second night, though, that his boss had left him a message saying that they finally found one. A real one. Michael remembered staring at the image on his tablet blankly at first. After all these years, there he was. It was him. Not some crude machine. He stared back into the camera. Somehow he knew it was him. Or at least, he knew for sure when he made it to the front of his window before Michael quickly lured away the suit. He didn't know how long he had been staring at him, but it didn't matter. He said nothing, and when Michael saw him, he didn't have anything to say either. They both knew where they stood with each other at that point. William had probably gathered that when he saw what Michael had become. Michael had been that way since that had happened to him all those years ago. Finally, here and now, Michael wanted to put an end to all that his father had done. He wanted to destroy William utterly. He only needed to survive long enough to figure out how. He quickly lured the suit away, and William was forced to leave, but never broke his gaze on his son. That whole week was a blur of emotion and survival. Each new night, William seemed to get more and more desperate to get him, but something else seemed to be keeping him from surviving long enough to think of how to destroy him. Throughout the week from the second night onward, it wasn't just William that appeared to harass him. Ghostly, burned apparitions of the animatronics of Freddy's past would appear to scare him almost every time he turned his head to look around the room. He also caught glimpses of what he had seen years before. Shadowy apparitions of a Freddy animatronic. For both, they seemingly wouldn't, or couldn't, hurt him. But Michael got the feeling that someone or something else besides William was trying to stop him. He remembered he had seen similar hallucinations of that Fredbear character years ago, but he didn't have much time to dwell on that thought. Something else from the past had popped up around the same time. Michael did a double take when he saw that old security puppet on his camera feed. He knew it was real as he saw the reflection on the floor below it. His boss hadn't mentioned finding this at all, and given how excited he had been about drawings and old casings, he surely would have mentioned this had he found it. Michael had to assume it found its way here on its own. Or, well, her way here. He knew the soul of Charlie must still be in that thing after all these years. William himself had told him years ago. She didn't speak to him, but she didn't seem to be stopping him either. It was on the sixth night that something different happened, though. When he looked into the mask of the puppet from his tablet as it stood in that hallway, it felt as if time ground to a halt. Or perhaps slowed so strongly he couldn't tell the difference between time halting and this one singular moment in time
being stretched to its utmost. His gaze remained fixed on the mask of the puppet. Michael's vision slowly became someone else's as the darkness enveloped him. He couldn't move or even turn his eyes. He was like the passenger of a car, but worse. And whoever was driving this car wanted him to see something, and trying to fight it seemed like a bad idea. Slowly, he saw a distant light come into view. This singular point of light started to become closer and closer as whoever was guiding him moved towards the light. It looked like a cartoon world from an arcade. He could hear music faintly in the distance. It sat suspended as a colorful island in the middle of an ocean of darkness. As they moved closer to the island, he noticed a pair of yellow dots in the darkness between them and the island. Whoever he was with paused, and after a moment, the light spoke. Everything that happens out there has an effect here. Do you understand? Yes, replied the voice of a girl from the mouth of Freddy. I found the last of him. I am ready, the voice of Freddy continued. He is not, said the pair of eyes in the darkness. At least let me try, said the girl from Freddy. I cannot control him. He refuses to speak to me anymore. I keep the world nice for him, for all of them, but they should be free. Cassidy only wants him, wants to hurt him any way he can. That's why they're all still here, said the eyes. He is broken now too. If he lets them go, he can grab as much of him as he wants, said Freddy. If he does leave, you are welcome to stay. David could use a friend, said the eyes. No, the others still need me, said Freddy. A brief moment of silence hung in the air. You may go. You may try. I make no promises on what he will do, but I will help you. The pair of eyes then moved to Freddy's side and paused. The head of Freddy turned over ever so slightly towards the eyes. Goodbye, Fiona, said the girl. Goodbye, Charlie, said the eyes. After they had arrived in the world, the Freddy seemed to play along with the adventure placed before him, but a cartoon Fredbear and a glitchy plush Fredbear seemed to be trying to manipulate whoever he was inside of. The Fredbear wanted Freddy to disable the game's security. The glitchy plush wanted Freddy to leave breadcrumbs for a him. When Michael first heard that, he knew that whoever this was wanted to fix his brother. To do this, they were told to find clocks throughout this world, and when they did, he was suddenly engulfed in darkness. The eyes of the glitchy plush spoke aloud. We are still your friends. Do you believe that? The pieces are in place for you. All you have to do is find them. Rest. After a moment of silence, Michael felt as if whoever he was watching all this through was now gone. The eyes continued to look at him through the darkness. Go, was all Michael heard before he felt a sensation of movement backwards. He closed his eyes, trying to see anything as he flew through the darkness, but when he opened them, he was back in his chair at Fazbear's Fright. Frantically pulling up his security tablet, Michael looked back at the puppet standing in the hallway to see if it was still there. It was. Time felt as if it had crawled to a standstill. No words came, and none were offered, but understanding slowly came into his mind. They had done it.
The one keeping his brother tethered to this world relented. Not just for him, but all of them. The pieces were in place for him, and he put himself back together. He chose the rest he was finally offered. Tears filled his eyes as he realized his brother was finally at peace. He felt pain that he could no longer apologize to his brother in person, but knowing that he was finally able to move on was enough. It would have to be. At the end of that night, Michael knew his mission was complete. His brother was finally at peace. He no longer needed to return and only wanted to see his father destroyed. As he left the building at the end of his shift, he set fire to a pile of trash in the corner. As he pulled away in his van, Fazbear's Fright was already engulfed in flames. The next few months were slow and quiet. Michael had told his mother all that happened that week, and after a night of tears together, Michael asked her if she was able to find Henry. Sadly, it seems like Henry was better at covering his tracks than they had guessed, and the lead his mother had found ended up going nowhere. Still, it was almost moot at this point. They had done what they set out to do. For a while, they tried to return to some kind of normal daily routine to continue on with their lives. After a few months, however, his mother had approached him with something she had found recently. Freddy's had popped up again. She found an advertisement from Fazbear Incorporated looking for investors to buy franchise packages. This had to be him. What angle could he be playing at? They could only guess, but they knew for sure this had to be him again.
Could we even afford it?
Michael chuckled aloud to his mother as he read the advertisement.
You know we can, Michael. We've been careful with his savings for years, and the royalties alone would cover it. Besides, I already called myself. They're asking for a lot less than I expected. Whatever he's doing, it must not be about the money, or he's desperate, she said confidently.
Or both, Michael chimed in with the sound of a bemused smile still on his face. After a moment, he looked up from the newspaper and turned to face his mother in a more serious tone.
This has to be him. We need to at least try to contact him, and if buying a franchise is the only way we could get face-to-face with him, so be it. We still know so little about how any of this works. We still need to try and fix Elizabeth. Hell, I'm still, as I am. If anyone would know how to fix this, it would be him, Michael pointed out.
His mother was quiet for a few moments in thought. She was usually pretty quick to respond. Half the time it seemed her mind still moved faster than his. Not that he was particularly slow to begin with, but she seemed almost lost in thought before responding with,
Exactly. It's our best shot to get any answers, so we might as well try,
she said in an almost unsure tone.
Hey,
Michael said more softly, reaching out to give her elbow a squeeze.
We can do this. We are so close to finishing all of this once and for all. Once we get some answers from him, we can fix Elizabeth. I can get patched up, and we can go back to living some kind of normal. That's what I've been working so hard towards. This is what she's been waiting on too,
Michael said as he nodded towards the safe. Inside the safe they had kept the chip Circus Baby had instructed him to take years ago that contained the soul of his sister. Henry would know for sure on how best to fix her, and they had dared not guess at it themselves for all these years.
All right, go ahead and make the call and try to your best to sound professional. I'll drive over to the bank and wire over the money when you get the details from him,
she said, now with a bit more confidence. It would be within the next couple phone calls and weeks that Michael was now officially a franchisee of Fazbear Incorporated. Now, all there was to do was face the man himself after all these years. Nothing was going as expected. His first night, he did as he was instructed over the phone and drove to the franchise location. He had fully expected to find Henry waiting in a back office,
But when he entered the room as he was instructed to, all he found was an audio cassette and a dimly lit empty room. When he sat at the table and played the tape, the voice of an old man started to play. It told him that he was now a franchisee of Fazbear Incorporated, and he was to operate the pizzeria as normal, but to also fulfill his special obligations under paragraph 4. He and his mother noted that particular section as odd. It seemed like for whatever reason, Henry was actively looking for the things that had used his own body all those years ago, and others besides. He was instructed to check the back alley after every shift for any vintage animatronics. He had said that as the pizzeria continues to operate, they would be drawn to this place like moths to a flame or a mouse to a trap. Michael should have known Henry would pull something like this. If he was clever enough to hide so successfully for years, he was surely smarter than speaking to him face to face and forced to give answers. For now, though, Michael decided to play along as he knew for sure Henry was here. Each following night, he would check the alley, and each night he would find exactly what he knew he would. First he found that amalgamation that used his body, then William. Then that thing pretending to be his sister. The last one was a type of Freddy animatronic he didn't recognize. It wasn't until he saw a black and white striped arm within the animatronic that he realized what was inside of it. He couldn't make any sense of it. Did he not know how dangerous this was? Having them all together in one place? This old fool was going to get them all killed. Each night he told his mother about what had showed up that night, but she didn't seem to have much of a better idea at what Henry was planning than he did. He couldn't help but shake the feeling his mother was being hesitant about something? Or was there something she just wasn't telling him? He could just be letting himself get paranoid, but the thought lingered regardless. He just couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from him. Still, he had to stay focused on whatever Henry was planning, and he was sure it wouldn't be long until he figured out what. On Saturday, he finally got his answer. There would be no final confrontation of Henry. No demanding of answers that he, in retrospect, probably didn't have. This was all a trap. He had gathered them all, including himself, in one place, to end all of them. Michael had just ended his shift and had managed to survive their assaults all week. But before he could even get up from his chair, a voice spoke from the darkness. It was the voice of Circus Baby. She was gloating to him before the voice of Henry finally cut her off, and he explained himself to all of them. He revealed that this was, indeed, a trap that they had all stumbled into. His intention was to burn the building down with all of them inside, so that all of the souls that were trapped in each of them could finally move on and find peace. All except for William. The darkest pit of hell was all that was left for him, and Michael couldn't be happier to finally be rid of the monster that had caused so much pain, not just to himself, but, in the end, all those around him. All for nothing. Even he had nothing to do with his brother finding peace. The others seemed to have handled that themselves without him. As Henry spoke about how this job listing wasn't intended for him and that there was a way out planned for him, he doubted that he would take it and that he assumed Michael was right where he wanted to be. As Henry continued speaking, Michael could feel the slowly rising heat becoming unbearable. It wasn't just the heat itself, but it felt almost like something was trying to rip itself out from his own muscle and bones. Michael started to tone out Henry's monologue as he thought to himself, maybe Henry was right. Maybe this is the only way to move on. His life, as He knew it since he was 23 years old, had been living as this undead husk of his former self. Just as he was about to run from the building, he paused before even standing from his chair. As the heat continued to steadily rise, the feeling of ripping inside him only got stronger, and the sound of Henry's voice. Michael sat back down and took in a deep breath and closed his eyes. If this was the only way for all of them to find peace, Michael himself saw no reason why he couldn't rest his own soul either. They could all now finally rest. Himself, the original victims of William, Charlie, Wait, where was the chip? Where was the chip he set on the desk? Frantically, he looked around on the floor to see if it had knocked over. Pouring sweat and becoming dizzy from the smoke, Michael couldn't see it. Just as he was about to worry that he had somehow lost or impossibly forgotten it, he saw a pair of little stubby pink-bottomed animatronic legs slide into a vent beside the back door. In a panic, Michael ran to the door and burst his way through. In the cool night air, Michael suddenly felt the ripping pain cease almost immediately, but it barely registered in that moment. He frantically looked around the back alley before hearing a vent kick open. He looked over to his side to see halfway down the building the little helpy animatronic fall from the vent into a pile of trash before rising and running away. "Hey!" shouted Michael. "Give that back! That has my sister!" It turned to regard him for a moment before expressing fear at his appearance and then bolting towards the adjacent alley away from him. Michael gave chase as the Freddies behind him burst into flames. Michael had much more he would end up regretting about that night for many more years to come. William opened his eyes to see that he was inside of a Freddy's. Unsure of what or who caused him to be here, he looked around the room for a moment. It was a security office, but not one that he recognized in particular. As he looked around, he noticed his hands. He had his hands back. He checked himself for a moment to see that he was indeed restored to his old body. Something powerful must be involved if he is now restored in here, wherever here is. Annoyed that he was apparently put back in his old security guard uniform, he sat down at the desk in front of him and began the first night of his own personal hell. The end. All right. That was okay. I'm seeing like 3.5 hours worth of raw audio. So I'm praying this video's under 3 hours at the end of it, but that's the hard part done. So now I literally just have in the script ramble incoherently about the theory. So that's what I'm gonna try to do now. So thank God I don't really have to read as much from this point, and I can just randomly sort of yap and ramble as my brain is fried from almost 4 hours worth of recording. Which, by the way, I'm sorry, like, I know, like, female voices are hard, man. I try, like, it's hard. I've already got, like, a deeper voice to begin with, so, like, doing women believably is, like, really hard, so don't roast me too bad.
what is it? And I know, yeah, my accents aren't really that good at all. I'm sorry. It's just if it's good enough to keep you in the story, whatever. I did my job, kinda. Um, I've got some notes here. It's at this point I need to pause and clarify that I currently believe it's dying in fear that causes a soul to shatter from the hands of another. Now, it could come to light with later information that this is not the case, or, more likely, one of you in the comments points out something I completely missed, and I have to tweak the mechanics of how shattering exactly happens, but I just thought I'd add this really quickly at the end to explain how I think this works, while moving forward with the assumption that either way, this is what is happening. That's a little blurb I added in to just kind of say that, like, I will admit that is like the one like rougher parts of this theory is that I can't explain exactly the mechanics of how shattering happens. Like it seems that fear really is the common component of both. Like otherwise it's like what's the point of a lot of FNAF 4 like other than the mini games? Right? Like especially with Didophobia, like the context we have now. Like it feels important, right? Like Scott is showing us this for a reason. And hey, what is it? FNAF 4 was the one game for sure like none of us figured out or or at least in the beginning. Maybe we did later. I don't know. Or didn't like one random guy figure it out and like nobody found it or whatever? Maybe I'm just daydreaming that. I don't remember. Um so yeah, I don't know. That's just my take. Like, if any of you have any like better, like more like researched and coherent thoughts about how shattering happens, please, for the love of God, leave them in the comments section because I am not smart enough to figure them out. I am just desperate enough to write a 30,000 word script and record it and make a slideshow for you all as I tell my very insanely biased headcanon tied to the lore version of the timeline, in my opinion. Um, which, believe it or not, for like a lot of this, I do have like 80% of it is stuff I can directly tie from the games. Like writing this timeline, I really, really, really wanted to not pull from the books if I could absolutely help it. I wanted to use only what Scott and Steel Wool have given us, like in the games and what is tied to the games for sure, right? Because like even getting people to agree that there are different continuities within this one canon, like in my opinion, how there's a games canon, there's a book canon, there's a movie canon, and I go so far as to argue there's an Into the Pit canon that's separate from all of them. Or well, continuity, not canon. They're all canon, but they're separate continuities within the one canon. I know it's convoluted, but like this is how it makes it easier for me to look at the FNAF lore. And again, like that's my point, right? Like getting any of us to agree on even that is hard to begin with, right? Like none of us are ever gonna have like the one answer on this, and like even if I'm only right about like one thing in this stupid video, and like or even if I just get you to like think about something a little more closely, like give it a little bit more scrutiny, another look, and like make your own theories that much more solid, then hey, I've done my job, and hey, hopefully, like, if nothing else, I told a decent story to listen to. Like, hopefully, good God, again, this video is, like, hopefully under 3 hours long, and I don't know, you can, like, I live somewhere where I've got to drive an hour out and an hour back, and I've got, like, 2 hours, like, to do a city trip. So, like, there's 2 out. Like, I don't know. Hopefully, you guys have something similar, and you could just throw me on in a car ride and listen to me yap for 3 hours. And then, I don't know. You could finish the other part at the gym. I don't know. God, it's gonna be, like, so, like, insanely, I'm trying to think of the polite word. Confident of me to just drop a 3-hour video on a theory. Hey, I told you this was the ramble incoherently part of the video. I've recorded for over 3 hours of audio. Like, please just allow me, like, a little bit of, like, unscripted, yapping at the end here to kind of decompress my thoughts. And again, if any of you have literally any questions about literally anything in this video, about the theory itself, how it works, and especially, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of, like, clarifying what I think happens in the timeline, and why I put certain things where I do in the timeline, and, like, am I sure about it, and can I explain a little more, like, while it's all still fresh in my mind, because I promise you it is, at least now. Go down, and again, I'm not just saying this, literally, like, ask me in the comments, I will respond, I promise you, like, hopefully this video doesn't get, like, big, but it's, like, I will do my level best to hit as many of your questions as I possibly can. Again, and I encourage you to do it, like, after this gets uploaded, like, while this is all still fresh in my mind, because I have specific, insane reasons as to, like, why I think things are where they are. I mean, I know there's, like, a handful of things I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for. But, you know, like, even if I'm wrong, like, I hope I get you guys to think about it. Like, look at some, like, answer, right? Like, you know, like, certain, like, I don't know. I think certain characters are certain characters for certain reasons. And, you know, maybe you didn't even think there were characters before. I don't know, right? You know, if this does well and I can, like, convince VRAR and Bronze Films enough, maybe even I could do a part 2 with the Steel Wool era with them, and we were, like, speculating, you know, oh, maybe we could each do it, like, it's multiple choice, right? Where it's, like, you know, we all, like, follow the story up to a certain point in the Steel Wool era, and then we all branch off, and then we each have our 3 different interpretations of, like, how the timeline kind of, like, ends, or at least, like, meets up to where we are at the current point in the lore, right? Like, I know, like, with the news we just got, I'm recording this after we got the news of, what is it, FNAF World 2 and Security Breach 2, which also, by the way, everyone, I called it. I get to brag about that now. I called it FNAF World 2. Yes. Any of you other believers, we were right. We called it. Yes. The doubters doubted. And we stay winning. Excellent. And yeah, I think most of us predicted Security Breach 2. But I'm still excited for it nonetheless. But yes, like that, like doing a part 2 up to that point, whenever, like, we leave off in the timeline, I would love to do that. Especially in the lead up to those games releasing, hopefully in the next year or so. And again, like, again, rambling incoherently, like, there's nothing I can think of offhand, so I beg you, like, just leave a comment if you have literally any question, or even several. Like, I promise you, I put enough work in this video, like, I am more than happy to, like, spend a lot of time, like, just answering questions so it's clear, right? Because, like, look at how long this stupid video already is anyways, right? Like, imagine if I included all of my notes for, like, every little singular teeny little point, right? And I also added that in and stopped to explain all of that in the middle of a story, right? Or even bolted it on to the end here, right? Like, this would be, like, a 10-hour video and not a or not 6, hopefully less than 3-hour video. But yeah, just because I'm getting tired of yapping and I've got to go to the gym now. Thank you all. Thank you so much for watching this video. This video has been a little bit of background lore. I started writing this, I remember, before Christmas of 25. So I've been writing this stupid thing for most of the year. It's taken me up to this long, to get it to this point. Hopefully it's just a slideshow and I didn't spend another month editing this stupid thing. And hopefully there will be more, and hopefully I have normal human videos after this point.
But I don't know. I just might do streaming after this for the rest of the year because, good God, this was a lot of work. A lot of work for a single video. But hey, I'm a real FNAF theorist now, right, guys? Look, I made a timeline, kind of. I'm not saying it's good, but it is a timeline. And hopefully it got you to think, if nothing else. And I hope, above all, it's a good story, right? I think I did a very good, like, I don't know. I like it as a story, even if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's like, I like it as a story. I like the way I handled each of the characters, and it's like, and again, if you want to even ask me about that, about like why I had certain characters portrayed in certain ways, doing certain things, etc., etc. Again, feel free to ask it down in the compliment section below. But yeah, I'm probably going to end this monster of a video here. Hopefully it is a slideshow, or I've got like some goofy like image on screen right now. I'm going to stop talking now. So thank you so much for all of my subscribers up to this point, and anyone else who would want to by this point, after this. Yeah. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you for watching. Also, by the way, in case this video blows up, I am trying to become a voice actor. My stuff should be linked in my channel at some point somewhere, or even in this video. I know my voice acting isn't amazing, but I'm getting better. So if you ever want me for anything, please reach out. But yeah, that's it. No more padding. Alright, goodbye. Thank you for watching.